If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 41, Strange Red Dimension. Third person's POV. Due to the eye of Agamotto, Stephen Strange knew without a doubt that she was being truthful. No lies lingered in her words. "I'll do my best to get you out of there," Stephen promised, still reeling from the shock of her situation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "If you don't mind me asking," Stephen began cautiously, his voice soft so as not to upset her further, "how long have you been trapped in there?" "More than 500 years, maybe longer," she replied, her voice tinged with sorrow. "I've lost count, all I know is that centuries have passed." Stephen's eyes widened in disbelief. 500 years? You've been awake in there for over 500 years. It's probably been longer, but honestly, I can't remember exactly how long it's been. She hesitated, sounding awkward, as if embarrassed by her inability to recall. Stephen inhaled deeply, steadying his thoughts. "Let's take this slow. We'll figure it out. For now, let's get to know each other a bit while I search for a solution." He reached for his grimoire, which had been floating by his side, its pages flickering with a faint glow. "I'm Stephen Strange. What's your name?" "Wanda. Wanda Maximoff." There was a glimmer of relief in her voice, as if being able to speak her name after so long was a comfort in itself. Stephen smiled warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Wanda." "And you, Stephen," she replied softly, her voice laced with joy at the simple act of conversation. As Stephen opened his grimoire, he whispered a silent incantation, willing it to reveal information on the Crimson Dimension. His fingers traced the ancient pages, and soon, the text about Sidorak appeared before him. This is going to be a problem," he muttered under his breath. Wanda's heart skipped a beat. "What? What's wrong?" Her voice trembled. Am I stuck here forever?" Stephen hesitated. "The crystal that holds you, it originates from the Crimson Dimension, a realm ruled by Sidorak, a being known both as a god and a demon. Anything from his realm is, well, virtually indestructible." Wanda's breath hitched, her voice soft and filled with despair. "So, I really am stuck here forever?" "Not necessarily," Stephen interjected, though his tone was laden with weariness. "There is a way to free you, but it's incredibly dangerous." He scratched his head, frowning. "It could get us both killed if we're not careful." "I'll do it!" Wanda exclaimed, desperation flaring in her voice. "I'll do whatever it takes. If it kills me, then at least I'll be free from this torment. I know I'm asking a lot of you, risking your life for someone you barely know, but you're my only hope." Stephen shook his head, determination settling in his eyes. "Don't worry about that. I gave you my word, and as a sorcerer, that means something. A sorcerer's word is sacred. I will get you out of here." "Thank you, Stephen, truly," Wanda whispered, her gratitude palpable. "Don't thank me just yet," Stephen replied, his tone dry. "Wait until I get you out of here and hopefully, without killing us both in the process." He turned his attention back to his grimoire, thumbing through more pages before explaining his plan. "We're going to go to the place where the crystal originates, the Crimson Dimension. I'll take us there and we'll confront Sidorak himself. He's the only one with the power to free you." "I see," Wanda muttered, her voice steady though filled with anxiety. "I understand why you said it's dangerous. But if you believe this will work, then I trust you." Stephen nodded. "The thing is, I'm not sure it'll work. It's a gamble. I'll have to appeal to both his godly and demonic sides and hope he's feeling generous. But we have no other choice." Moving with purpose, Stephen strode to a small pile of treasure in the corner of the room. He retrieved a handful of ancient gold coins and tossed them to the floor. His hands began to move rapidly, weaving intricate gestures as a small, glowing orb formed between his fingers. "Arcane magic, hoary hosts of Hoggoth," he chanted, his voice echoing with power. As the magic washed over the coins, they transformed into red candles and a piece of red chalk. Stephen knelt and began drawing an elaborate pentagram on the floor, setting the candles at each point and lighting them one by one. He closed the curtains, plunging the room into darkness, save for the eerie crimson glow of the flames. Wanda's voice broke the silence, filled with curiosity. "What are you doing?" "Preparing a ritual to contact him," Stephen replied, his tone matter of fact. I'm knocking on his dimensional door instead of barging in uninvited. I figure it might earn us some goodwill. Wanda couldn't help but chuckle, despite the gravity of the situation. Brownie points with a god demon. Stephen grinned, settling himself in the center of the pentagram, with Wanda's crystal behind him. He began to float as his eyes glowed with magic. I, Dr. Stephen Strange, call upon Sidorak, the Destroyer, the Lord of Oblivion, ruler of the Crimson Dimension. I beseech you to open a passage into your realm. I seek an audience. Silence hung heavy in the air as Stephen floated in place, waiting. The crystal behind him began to pulse, its glow intensifying until a brilliant beam of light shot from its core, illuminating the room. A swirling red portal opened before him, its edges crackling with otherworldly energy. Stephen smirked and glanced back at Wanda. Looks like the lord of the house just opened the door for us. With a confident stride, Stephen moved forward, the crimson crystal following closely behind. As they passed through the portal, it snapped shut, extinguishing the candles with a hiss. On the other side, the crimson dimension stretched out before Stephen like a surreal, scarlet-hued dreamscape. The ground was a vast desert of ruby-colored sand, broken by towering, volcano-like structures that spewed rust-colored ash into the air. The sky was locked in an eternal sunset, casting everything in an otherworldly red glow. In the distance, a colossal throne rose from the ground, and seated upon it was Sidorak. His hulking, crimson form towered over everything, his presence overwhelming. He was several meters tall, a godlike being of raw power. Stephen had to crane his neck just to look up at him. State your purpose, little sorcerer, Sidorak's voice boomed, echoing through the dimension. Stephen stood tall, undeterred by the towering figure. I seek the release of my companion, who is imprisoned within your crystal. As you know, your power makes anything from your dimension indestructible. Only you can free her. Sidorak's eyes narrowed. And why would I do that? What benefit is there for me? A confident smile played across Stephen's lips. We are a sorcerer and a witch, constantly battling powerful forces. When we invoke the power of your dimension, your name will echo across the multiverse. People will tremble at the mere mention of your name, knowing their defeat is inevitable when we wield the might of the Crimson Dimension. Sidorak's laughter shook the very ground beneath them. Ha ha ha. I like it. Spreading destruction in my name. Very well, sorcerer. I shall free your witch. But remember, you both shall wreak havoc in my name. Chapter 42, Strange Embrace. Third person's POV. From his throne, Sidorak's immense form loomed over the scene, his crimson aura crackling with raw power. His eyes gleamed with a malevolent satisfaction as he lazily extended one finger toward the towering crimson crystal that imprisoned the Scarlet Witch. At his silent command, cracks began to snake across the surface of the crystal, each fissure sounding like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence of the dimension. The crystal, once solid and unyielding, groaned under the strain until it finally shattered into 1,000 shards, scattering across the ground like deadly, glittering glass. Before she could hit the cold, hard surface below, Stephen Strange was there, his arms outstretched. He caught Wanda just in time, cradling her against him as her limp body sagged with exhaustion. Whoa there! Stephen muttered softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he steadied her. Straightening up, Stephen turned to face Sidorak, his expression a mixture of cautious gratitude and weariness. We are grateful, he said, his voice firm. Sidorak's gaze remained cold, indifferent to the pleasantries. Just remember you're part of the deal, young sorcerer, his voice boomed, carrying a dangerous edge that made the very air vibrate. Stephen nodded solemnly. A sorcerer's word is his bond, he replied, his tone unwavering as he reached for his sling ring. We will now be on our way and disturb you no further, he added, creating a shimmering portal back to the mirror dimension. With Wanda still leaning against him, the two stepped through, leaving the Crimson Dimension behind as the portal snapped shut with a crackle of energy. As the warmth of his own room in the mirror dimension surrounded them, Stephen felt Wanda stir in his arms. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinking as if trying to adjust to the reality around her. She pulled herself away from Stephen's support, looking down at her hands in disbelief. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her pale cheeks before she suddenly lunged forward, tackling Stephen to the ground. Whoa! Stephen exclaimed, caught off guard as they tumbled to the floor, with Wanda now on top of him. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her body trembling. Stephen instinctively raised his hands in surrender, his palms open and facing her as if to show he meant no harm. He was about to say something but stopped when he heard the faint sound of her sobs, felt the tremors running through her. "Thank you. Thank you," Wanda whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. Stephen sighed deeply, lowering his arms as he shifted beneath her. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her in a gentle hug, his hand resting against the back of her head, cradling her like a fragile thing. He said nothing, simply held her, offering the comfort she so desperately needed. For a while, Wanda clung to him, her grip tight, her face buried against his neck. The warmth of their shared embrace seemed to ease the weight of her sorrow, but her face flushed with embarrassment as she realized what she was doing. She hadn't experienced human contact in so long, centuries, perhaps. She had forgotten the simple joys of touch, of warmth, of the reassurance that another person could bring. And yet, even as the realization sank in, she couldn't bring herself to let go. Instead, she tightened her hold, burying her face deeper into his neck as if trying to soak in every last drop of comfort. Can we stay like this for a little bit?" Wanda's voice was small, hesitant, as if she feared he might reject her. "Yeah," Stephen said softly, not moving. "Take your time." Despite the moment, despite the closeness of the Scarlet Witch in his arms, all Stephen felt was pity. He could sense the depth of her loneliness, the years of isolation that had weighed on her spirit like a leaden chain. It broke his heart to think of the pain she had endured. After what felt like an eternity, Wanda finally began to withdraw from the hug, though she still remained seated by his stomach, her auburn hair hanging loose around her face. She looked down at Stephen, her eyes softened by vulnerability, yet there was a flicker of joy in her gaze. "So, this is what you look like," she said with a shy smile, gently brushing his hair away from his face. Stephen chuckled awkwardly, still lying on the floor. "Yup. This is me." Wanda giggled, a sound that seemed almost foreign to her after so much time spent in solitude. But then her expression changed as her eyes drifted to the eye of Agamotto hanging around Stephen's neck. Her brows furrowed, and before he could stop her, she reached out to touch it. "Wanda, no." Stephen began, but it was too late. The moment her fingers grazed the eye, it flared with a blinding golden light. Wanda let out a pained cry, recoiling as her hand burned from the touch. "Ah!" she gasped, clutching her hand, a fresh burn marking her palm. "Are you all right?" Stephen asked urgently, scrambling to his feet and grabbing her hand. He quickly made a hand gesture with his other hand as healing magic flowed from his fingertips into her burn. Wanda grimaced but gave him a small, apologetic smile. "I didn't miss the feeling of pain," she muttered, her voice wry despite the situation. "Why would you just grab it like that?" Stephen asked, his tone scolding but more concerned than angry. Wanda's expression darkened as she stared at the eye, her mind clearly elsewhere. "The man who trapped me in that crystal. He wore this around his neck, along with a red cloak." Stephen's eyes widened. "What?" Wanda nodded, her voice breaking as old memories resurfaced. "I was once living in a village with both my brother and mother, when suddenly bandits attacked. They came in the middle of the night. We didn't stand a chance. My brother fought back and he was strong, but they..." Wanda paused, her voice cracking as she struggled to continue. "They killed him in front of me. Then my mother tried to protect me, and they took her too." She closed her eyes, her fists clenching as the memories overwhelmed her. "I was so angry. I couldn't control it. All that rage. I just felt something snap inside me, and then I unleashed it. It was like an explosion of magic, a wave that swallowed everything. The bandits, the entire village, everything just disintegrated. One moment, they were there, and then they were gone. It was just me, standing in a wasteland of ash and rubble." Wanda looked up at Stephen, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't understand what I had done. And then, he appeared. The man in the red cloak floating, with that pendant around his neck." Stephen's breath hitched. "Both the cloak of levitation and the eye of Agamotto. He told me I was too dangerous to be left alone. That my power would destroy everything if I wasn't stopped. But he didn't want to kill me because, according to him, someone else with my power would be born. So, he said he had no choice but to seal me, lock me away in that crystal, to keep me from causing the world's destruction." Stephen's face hardened. "He had no right to do that. I tried to fight him," Wanda continued, her voice trembling. "I used every bit of magic I had. But he was too strong. I couldn't stop him. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was trapped. Alone. For centuries until you found me. Wanda's eyes were locked on the pendant again, her expression tense. I thought, maybe you knew something about him. That's why I grabbed it. Stephen sighed and gently released her hand, the burn now healed. I wish I could tell you more, but I was left at an orphanage with this thing alongside the cloak, Stephen said as he touched the eye pendant. Wanda nodded slowly, remorse shadowing her face. I'm sorry for grabbing it so suddenly. It's all right, Stephen said, his tone softening. Just, be more careful next time. Chapter 43, Strange Reaction. Third person's POV. Wanda continued to look at Stephen, her expression filled with both apology and shame as she massaged her now fully healed hand. The flickering lights in the dim room cast shadows on her face, accentuating her troubled gaze. What's with that look? Stephen asked, raising an eyebrow as they were still sat on the ground. Didn't I tell you it was all right? I get it, you were just surprised, seeing it for the first time. Wanda shook her head softly. That's not all, she murmured. You went and saved me, risked your life to set me free, and the first thing I did was accuse you of being involved in my imprisonment, when I should have been nothing but grateful. Before she could say more, Wanda gasped as Stephen flicked her forehead. Ouch! She exclaimed, wide-eyed, staring at him in shock. What was that for? She muttered, rubbing her forehead. Stephen shrugged nonchalantly, his eyes glinting with mischief. Honestly, it just felt like the right thing to do. You were being stupid. How was I being stupid? Wanda asked, still rubbing the sore spot, a slight pout forming on her lips. Because you're worrying about something so small, even though I told you it's fine. If I were in your shoes, I probably would have reacted the same way. Hell, I might actually have something to do with whoever imprisoned you, could have been some ancestor of mine. So, technically, you weren't wrong. A soft smile crept onto Wanda's face as she looked at him. He was trying to reassure her in his own strange way, and it worked. You still didn't have to flick me on the forehead, though, she said, giving him a playful glare and pouting even more. Stephen chuckled and stood up from where he'd been sitting on the floor, offering a hand to Wanda. Well, stop being stupid, and I won't have to do it again. Wanda let out a small laugh, slipping her hand into his as he helped her to her feet. The warmth of his hand was reassuring. Stephen sighed as he massaged his own forehead, his expression clouding over. What's wrong? Wanda asked, tilting her head, concern flashing in her eyes. I'm just trying to figure out what to tell the others, Stephen admitted. I can't exactly hide you forever, but I also don't know how they'll react. Maybe I can talk to the captain, get you into the Magic Knight squad. But I'm not sure how it'll go down. Captain? Magic Knight squad? Wanda asked, the terms foreign to her. She tilted her head in confusion, her brow furrowing slightly. Stephen realized she had no idea about any of this. Right, sorry. You're in the base of the Black Bulls, in the Clover Kingdom. Magic Knights are. Well, they're protectors of the kingdom. Kind of like soldiers, but with magic. Our squad, the Black Bulls, is a bit different from the rest, more misfits than knights. Stephen went on a rant and explained about all he could to Wanda about where she was. Wanda's eyes gleamed with curiosity as she listened to his explanation. I see. Well, in that case, I suggest we be honest, she said thoughtfully. If the Black Bulls are a bunch of misfits, then I'll fit right in. There's no better misfit than me, she added proudly. Stephen gave her a little shake of the head, smiling at her boldness. That's not exactly something to brag about. It could be. Wanda exclaimed, a little offended, her lips pursed. Stephen rolled his eyes but couldn't hide his grin. All right. But you do have a point though, honesty might be the best route. Let's go with that. Follow me. Without hesitation, Wanda followed closely behind, her hand clutching the back of Stephen's clothing as if afraid to lose him in the unfamiliar surroundings. And then YUNO sent the guy flying back with his wind magic. Asta shouted, standing on the table, enthusiastically retelling their recent dungeon adventure. The Black Bulls were all gathered, laughing and listening intently. Even Yami sat nearby, his hand resting on his katana, interested in their dungeon exploration. Suddenly, a strange crackling sound echoed through the room. The space itself seemed to splinter, like glass breaking in mid-air. Conversations halted, and everyone tensed. Yami's hand instinctively tightened on his sword. The tension eased slightly as Stephen stepped through the strange fracture in space, followed by a girl clutching his clothes, peeking out nervously from behind him. Wanda kept her head down, hiding from the curious eyes of the Black Bulls. The room fell silent, all eyes on the mysterious duo, until Yami finally spoke up, his deep voice breaking the quiet. "What's with the girl, Gramps?" Stephen scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "Funny story, actually. I found her, trapped in a crystal in the dungeon. So, I broke her out and brought her back here." The room remained dead silent for a moment. Yami sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Gramps, looks like old age is finally catching up to you. You've gone senile." Stephen opened his mouth to protest, but Wanda spoke up before he could. "He's not lying," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was trapped in that crystal for over 500 years, until Stephen freed me." "Over 500 years?" The entire squad erupted in shock, even Vanessa, who had been casually drinking, sobered up at the revelation. Stephen's expression hardened as he glanced at Wanda. What's worse, is that she was conscious the entire time. Yami's face darkened as he locked eyes with Stephen. "Are you an idiot? You broke someone out who was sealed away for centuries without telling anyone first? What if she's dangerous?" Stephen shook his head confidently, tapping the eye of Agamotto around his neck. "Don't worry. I could see through all deception. She's not dangerous." Yami's gaze lingered on the eye of Agamotto for a moment, as ever since Stephen's been a member he always had it on. He then turned to Wanda. "Hey, little lady, are you strong?" Wanda blinked, unsure how to answer at first. "I'd say I'm fairly strong, yes." "Good. You're in," Yami said with a grunt, raising a thumb. "Welcome to the Black Bulls." Wanda blinked in surprise. "Wait, that's it?" Yami scoffed. "You said you're strong, didn't you? That's good enough for me. You're an honorary Black Bull now." Before Wanda could protest further, Vanessa conjured a Black Bull's robe out of thin air and draped it over Wanda's shoulders. Charmy's sheep scooped her up without warning, setting her down at the table with the rest of the squad. "You poor thing!" Charmy exclaimed, her sheep bringing out plates upon plates of food. "Being trapped in a crystal for that long without eating anything? That's a crime against food. Eat up." Wanda hesitated, glancing at Stephen for reassurance. He simply nodded with a smile, encouraging her. Taking a deep breath, she cut into the steak in front of her and took a small bite. The moment the food touched her tongue, Wanda froze. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tasted real food for the first time in centuries. She took another bite, more tears flowing down her face. "This is so good," she cried softly. Thank you so much." Charmy and the others watched her with pity as she ate, crying through every bite. One by one, the Black Bulls gathered around her, encouraging her to try different dishes, each member eager to make her feel welcome. Yami, meanwhile, gestured for Stephen to follow him outside. Stephen nodded, giving Wanda one last glance before heading out with Yami, wondering what the captain would say next. Chapter 44, Strange Conversation with the Captain. Third Person's POV. Yami stood just outside the base, his figure cloaked in the cool evening air. A cigarette dangled from his lips, its tip glowing softly as he inhaled, releasing a cloud of smoke into the sky. His posture was casual, one hand stuffed into his pocket, while his eyes stayed focused on the horizon. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel made him glance to his side as Stephen walked up to join him. "What is it?" Stephen asked, raising an eyebrow as he regarded the dark-clad warrior. Yami didn't turn to face him. "Never figured you for the hero type, Gramps," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted lazily in the air. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, his hands slipping into the pockets of his pants. "Hero's a strong word," he muttered. "I just did what felt right at the time." A smirk tugged at Yami's lips, though he still didn't bother to look directly at Stephen. "Right. And breaking a girl out of a crystal that's been sealed for 500 years, without knowing why she was sealed in the first place? Yeah, that's just your typical feels right kind of day, hey." Yami flicked the ash from his cigarette, finally casting a sidelong glance at Stephen, his eyes sharp and observant. Stephen sighed deeply and ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I could see she wasn't dangerous," he explained, his voice quiet but firm. I used the Eye of Agamotto. It lets me see things most people can't. Truths hidden behind illusions. Wanda wasn't a threat, just someone who'd been wronged. Yami's expression remained unreadable as he took another slow drag from his cigarette, letting the smoke roll out in a long breath. That eye of yours is useful, I'll give you that. But just because you saw something doesn't mean you got the full picture. People don't get sealed away for centuries for no reason. Stephen crossed his arms, his frown deepening. You think I made a mistake? Yami's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no malice in his gaze, just a cool, steady caution. I think you didn't think it all the way through. We have no idea who locked her in that crystal, or what for. And even if you've got your reasons, you're still taking a big risk. Stephen hesitated, then nodded. I know. It might have something to do with me, he admitted quietly before explaining Wanda's story, what she had told him about her imprisonment and how it had led to their fateful meeting. Yami listened in silence, his cigarette slowly burning down between his fingers. When Stephen finished, Yami let out a long breath and stubbed out the cigarette on the ground. You're playing with fire, old man. It wasn't just reckless. It was damn near suicidal. You didn't just put yourself at risk, you put everyone in that base in danger. Every single one. You're not some lone mage wandering around anymore. You've got people who trust you, people who rely on you. And you brought a walking bomb into their home. I'll take full responsibility if it comes to that, Stephen said, his voice steady. I'll handle it. Yami gave a soft snort, a faint smirk appearing on his face. I don't like it, but I can't say I wouldn't have done the same thing. If I were in your shoes, I probably wouldn't have hesitated either. He turned to look directly at Stephen, his expression serious. But next time, you report it to me. I'm still your captain, right? Stephen gave a small, two-fingered salute, his mouth quirking into a lopsided grin. Yes, sir. Yami nodded and gestured toward the base, in a dismissive manner signaling the end of their conversation. Stephen turned to leave, but before he could take more than a few steps, Yami grabbed his shoulder. Wait a second. Stephen stopped and turned, eyebrow raised in confusion. What is it? Yami looked at him deadpan. I heard you know transmutation magic, right? We're out of toilet paper. I need you to make some. Stephen blinked in disbelief. Are you serious? Do I look like I'm joking, Grandpa? Hurry up, or I'll use that red cloak of yours instead. Yami's forehead was damp with sweat, and his face betrayed the urgency of his request. There is something seriously wrong with you, Stephen muttered. But with a sigh, he waved his hand, telekinetically lifting a few blades of grass from the ground. A quick spell from the hoary hosts of Hoggoth turned them into a neat roll of toilet paper. Yami snatched the roll from the air and sprinted back inside the base without another word. Stephen stood there for a moment, shaking his head in disbelief. Unbelievable! He muttered, before heading back inside himself. As he walked into the base, Stephen was greeted by the sight of his cloak of levitation floating towards him, dripping wet with steam rising from its surface. Stephen furrowed his brow. Why the hell are you wet? The cloak swayed side to side, mimicking the motions of someone scrubbing and washing. So, Noelle washed you as a thank you for covering her, hey? Stephen asked, crossing his arms. The cloak nodded smugly, puffing itself up with pride. You seem pretty pleased with yourself, Stephen chuckled. The cloak gave an exaggerated nod before Magna's voice rang out from down the hall. Stephen! It's your time of the week to do the chores. Yeah, I'm on it. Stephen called back, snapping his fingers to dry the cloak before draping it back over his shoulders. Later, in the kitchen, Stephen used his magic to wash dishes, lazily waving his hands as the plates scrubbed themselves in the sink. The cloak hovered nearby, drying and stacking them. Wanda poked her head into the room, hesitating before stepping inside. Hey, can we talk? She asked, her voice uncertain. Stephen glanced over, still directing the floating dishes. I hope I didn't get you in trouble with your captain, Wanda said, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. I saw you two talking outside. Nah, don't worry about it, Stephen replied with a shrug. I got scolded, sure, but I kind of deserved it. Which is weird, now that I think about it. I don't usually get scolded. Wanda bit her lip, unsure how to respond. It seems like I've brought nothing but trouble. Stephen interrupted her by raising his hand, middle finger under his thumb, and holding it towards her direction, giving her a warning look. Wanda blinked in surprise. Okay, I'll stop talking, she muttered, rubbing her forehead with a sigh. Stephen smirked. Look at you, getting smarter already. Wanda glared, her lips pursing in a pout. Are you calling me dumb? Did I say that? He teased, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Wanda let out a huff but soon broke into a smile. She stepped forward and gave Stephen a long grateful hug. Thank you, Stephen. For everything. Yeah, now go join the others. I'll be there soon. As Stephen finished with his chores he joined the others and found Noelle sitting with everyone, her arms crossed and glaring directed at Stephen. What now? Stephen groaned, throwing his hands in the air. Noelle huffed. First, you get engaged to my cousin Mimosa, and now you bring home another gorgeous woman. You, gigolo. Way-out! The rest of the room erupted in gasps, all eyes turning to him, shocked to find out he was engaged. Vanessa dramatically clasped her chest and wailed, No, not my Stephen. You told me I was the only one for you. That I was the only one you needed. Was it all a lie? Was it? Wanda's eyes widened in disbelief, looking at Stephen as though she had never truly known him. Stephen held up his hands defensively. First of all, I never agreed to that engagement. Your weirdo aunt forced it on me. Don't talk about my auntie that way. And second, he pointed at Vanessa, ignoring Noelle, I never said anything remotely like that to you. Stop making things up. Vanessa winked playfully. Teehee, your reactions are just too funny. I can't help myself. Wanda sighed in relief, her smile returning as she realized Stephen wasn't the player she had feared. Chapter 45, Strange Late Night Visit. Third Person's POV. In the Golden Dawn base. Late into the night, Mimosa sat in front of a gilded mirror, brushing her hair with gentle, rhythmic strokes. She wore a delicate, flowing nightgown, her golden locks shimmered as she brushed, each stroke calming her in the quiet hours of the night. In front of her, a small magic communicator hovered, casting a faint, ethereal glow as it projected a hologram of her mother. So, I met with Stephen, Mother Mimosa's cheeks flushed a soft pink as she continued to brush her hair, hesitating over her words. Oh? Did you now? And what did you think? Aurelia, her mother, asked, raising an elegant brow with a hint of curiosity. Mimosa's eyes softened, her expression wistful as she gathered her thoughts. He was nice. Handsome, even. Strong, too. When he found me injured, he didn't hesitate, he healed me immediately, even before I could activate my own spell, despite knowing what kind of magic I wield. Aurelia chuckled softly, a teasing smile playing at her lips. Oh, my. Don't tell me you're already developing feelings. I do know how to pick them, don't I? Mimosa's blush deepened, and she pouted, brushing her hair a little harder. Mother, please. I wouldn't say I'm developing feelings, but well, my heart does feel a bit fluttery when I think of him. Aurelia laughed, her mirth ringing through the communicator. You're simply adorable, my dear. Mimosa puffed her cheeks in mock indignation, crossing her arms. I'm hanging up now. All right, no more teasing, Aurelia said, still smiling. Good night, my love. Sweet dreams, she added, blowing a playful kiss through the hologram. Good night, Mother, Mimosa replied, rolling her eyes, but she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. When she finally ended the call, she let out a sigh, resting her forehead against the cool surface of the desk. Mimosa leaned her head to the side, staring into the mirror. I wonder when will I see him again? She murmured, tracing idle patterns on the desk with her fingertips. Her thoughts lingered on Stephen, weaving between memories of his kindness and the strange, fluttering warmth that his presence seemed to evoke. A soft knock suddenly echoed in the quiet room, startling her. She jumped, glancing around, but the room was empty. Confused, her eyes returned to the mirror and froze. Inside the reflection, as though through a translucent veil, stood Stephen himself, giving her an awkward smile and a small, uncertain wave. Mimosa blinked, unsure if she was dreaming, but there he remained, his form rippling in the mirror's surface. Just as she opened her mouth to scream, his hand shot through the glass, covering her mouth before any sound could escape. His touch was gentle yet firm, and as he leaned through the mirror, he held a finger to his lips. "Please, don't scream," he whispered. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, can we just talk?" Mimosa's wide eyes slowly softened, and she gave a quick nod, agreeing to his request. Stephen carefully lowered his hand, pressing his palms together in an apologetic gesture. "I'm really sorry for the sudden visit," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I just felt it was important. May I come in?" Mimosa's cheeks turned a deep crimson, but she found herself nodding again. She took a few steps back, creating space for him to step out of the mirror. With a soft shimmer, Stephen glided through, his cloak billowing faintly behind him as he landed gracefully before her. She covered her face, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to calm herself. After a deep breath, she peeked over her fingers, her voice coming out shy and soft. "So what was it you wanted to discuss?" Stephen sighed, his expression turning serious. "It's about our engagement." Mimosa's heart skipped a beat. "Our engagement?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, glancing at her with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Yes. I feel that we need to talk about it, just us. Away from our families and squads, without anyone else deciding things for us." Mimosa's gaze softened as she gestured toward her bed, sitting at its edge and patting the spot beside her. Stephen joined her, settling cautiously as if he were a guest, his fingers resting tensely in his lap. "I would offer you something, but it's late," she murmured, feeling the quiet weight of the moment between them. Stephen gave a small smile, shaking his head. "No, really, that's fine. I didn't exactly give you much notice, did I?" Silence lingered for a moment before he spoke, his tone hesitant. "Can I ask how you truly feel about all of this? Doesn't it bother you?" Mimosa tilted her head, a small frown creasing her brow. "Bother me? Why would it?" "Well," he began, looking away, "your future was chosen for you. Without your say in it." She shook her head, her voice gentle. "Being born into nobility, you learn early to surrender a part of your freedom. My meals, my clothes, even my studies were chosen for me from a young age. Now that I'm older, I have some choice, but my family's expectations will always be there. It's why I joined the Golden Dawn instead of Crimson Lion. I wanted to earn my place on my own. So, no, it doesn't really bother me." Stephen took in her words, his expression softening. "That sounds difficult." Mimosa giggled softly, shaking her head. "It's not as bad as I made it sound. I've had plenty of happiness in my life, too. My parents met through an arranged marriage, and they're very much in love. So, I've never thought poorly of the idea. I always knew it would be part of my life, eventually." Her voice softened, and her cheeks grew pink as she added, almost to herself, "I've always hoped for a love like theirs. My father used to say he found his soulmate through an arrangement, and I'd love to be that lucky, too." Hearing this, Stephen's gaze shifted, a blush creeping up his own cheeks. He cleared his throat, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Mimosa caught the flustered look in his eyes and quickly waved her hands, flustered. "Oh, please, don't think too much of that. I didn't mean to imply anything," she stammered, covering her face again. Taking a steadying breath, Stephen looked at her thoughtfully. "I never saw arranged marriages that way. To me, marriage was always this sacred bond, a choice between two people who loved each other. Having others dictate that choice seemed wrong. It felt like it ruined what made it special." Mimosa's laughter broke the solemn air, and Stephen looked at her, bewildered. She waved a hand apologetically. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh at you. It's just sweet. Not everyone sees marriage that way." Stephen smiled, though a bit bashfully. "I grew up in an orphanage. I guess marriage, family, it's something I always thought about, and hold dear." Mimosa's warm gaze lingered on him, understanding filling her expression. But then, her smile faltered, and she looked down, her voice becoming a fragile whisper. "So you're not happy about being engaged to me?" Seeing the sadness in her eyes, Stephen immediately reached out, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. She looked up, surprised by the earnestness in his gaze. "It's not about you, Mimosa. I don't want you to think that for a second. You are incredibly beautiful and remarkable. Any man would be lucky to call you his fiancée." Mimosa's heart raced, her face turning a shade of pink that matched the warmth in her chest. She could barely breathe as she looked up at him. Stephen, realizing he was still holding her, slowly released his grip, his hands falling to his lap as he looked away, exhaling a shaky sigh. It's just the fact we didn't choose this. It feels like we're just pieces on a chessboard, moved at someone else's will. Mimosa, feeling a swell of compassion, reached out. She placed her hand atop his, giving him a gentle squeeze, and when he looked at her, she offered a soft, reassuring smile. Without a word, he turned his hand over, his fingers entwining with hers, their connection a quiet understanding. Chapter 46, Strange Tender Moment. Third Person's POV. Stephen and Mimosa sat together in a comfortable silence. Mimosa leaned her head gently against his shoulder, her soft breaths matching the rise and fall of his. Their fingers were intertwined. After a while, Mimosa broke the silence, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You know we can get this annulled if you really want to." "I don't mind," she murmured, as if reluctant to disturb the peace between them. Stephen shook his head slowly, casting a thoughtful look. "Somehow, I doubt it's that simple. Like you said, it was the Wizard King who made it official. I don't think he'd be too keen to retract it. Not without good reason, at least." Mimosa's eyes drifted to the floor, a faint hint of determination beneath her gentle gaze. "It was my mother's wish," she said softly. "If you truly wanted to end this, I could convince her to take it back." Stephen turned to her, his gaze steady and searching. "But do you want it to be annulled?" he asked, raising a curious brow. Mimosa hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around his. "It's not really about what I want," she replied, looking away. "I wouldn't want you to feel trapped or obligated to do something you don't want. But that's just it, Mimosa. It does matter." Stephen's voice was firm, but kind. "An engagement isn't something one person should decide on their own. No offense, but I don't want to make decisions for you, like your mother seems to think she can. So yes, your feelings matter. If you don't want to annul this, then let's talk it through. That's why I'm here to work through this together." For a moment, Mimosa was quiet, her expression softening as she looked at him. Slowly, she reached up, her fingertips brushing his cheek with tenderness. "You're a very kind person, Stephen," she whispered. But then her gaze fell, a flicker of regret crossing her face. "I'm sorry. I know it's selfish, but I don't want to annul it," she admitted, her voice thick with a mix of vulnerability and hope. She began to pull her hand away, her expression downcast, but Stephen gently clasped her hand before she could retreat. "All right then," he said simply, a small smile curving his lips. "We won't annul it." Mimosa blinked, surprise lighting up her features. He hadn't even taken a moment to think it over. "But I thought. Just because we're engaged doesn't mean we have to rush into marriage, right?" Stephen's smile grew as he turned his full attention to her, his voice brimming with warmth and understanding. Mimosa's heart skipped a beat as she realized what he was suggesting, and she found herself nodding eagerly. "So let's take our time," he continued. "Let's get to know each other better. And if, a few years down the line, you decide I'm not the one for you, then we can part as friends. But if, after all that, you do still want to marry me, then we'll make it official. How does that sound?" Unable to contain her emotions, Mimosa threw her arms around him in a heartfelt embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with relief. "Thank you for going along with my selfishness." Stephen was momentarily taken aback but quickly returned the hug, chuckling softly. Mimosa pulled back slightly, gazing up at him with a shy smile. "If you ever fall in love with someone else," she began, her voice barely a murmur, "I don't want our engagement to hold you back. Just tell me, and we'll call it off. I want you to be happy." Stephen nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The same goes for you," he assured her gently. Mimosa smiled, resting her head against his chest and closing her eyes. They stayed like that for a while, savoring the quiet. Later, as the night grew deeper, Stephen and Mimosa stood facing each other in her mirror, preparing to say their goodbyes. "I think I may have overstayed my welcome," Stephen said with a sheepish smile. "It's getting late." Mimosa shifted, glancing down as she twiddled her fingers. Will you come visit me like this again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stephen raised an amused brow. "Would you like me to?" Mimosa flushed, looking away. "Though you did show up like a creepy pervert, I enjoyed your visit. Just maybe send a message next time," she added bashfully, a small smile playing on her lips. Stephen chuckled, his eyes glinting with mischief. I'll be sure to give you a fair warning the next time I decide to show up like a pervert. Turning toward the mirror that would be his passage back, when he felt a gentle tug on his cloak. He looked back to find Mimosa standing on her tiptoes, her face tinged pink as she pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. A rosy hue colored Stephen's cheeks as he stared at her in surprise. Mimosa looked down, practically glowing with embarrassment. A kiss on the cheek is normal, right? She mumbled, fidgeting with her hands. I mean, you are my fiancé. Stephen felt a grin tug at his lips. Right, he murmured, leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to her cheek in return. I'll see you soon. With one last look, he turned and stepped through the mirror, which shimmered briefly before swallowing him up, leaving Mimosa alone in the quiet room. As the reality of the evening settled over her, Mimosa touched her cheek, her mind reeling. I didn't think he'd actually kiss me back. Letting out a soft squeal, she hurried back to her bed and flopped down, hugging her pillow tightly. She traced her fingers over her cheek and then her lips, a soft giggle escaping as she whispered, I hope he doesn't think I'm too easy. With one last happy sigh, she looked up at the ceiling, a gentle smile on her face. Thank you, Mother, she whispered, her heart brimming with contentment. As Stephen arrived back at the base, stepping out from the fractures of the mirror dimension, he stretched deeply, a large grin stretching across his face as he savored the feeling of being back. Noticing Nero perched on her usual spot with her typical deadpan look, Stephen rolled his eyes, finding the sight amusing. With a skip in his step, he made his way over to his bed, his grimoire clutched tightly in his hands. Sitting down, he glanced toward Nero, beckoning with a playful tone, come on. Nero looked hesitant, her feathers ruffling slightly before she took flight and landed on his shoulder. Stephen smiled as he opened his grimoire, and in a flash, the two were transported to his mystical library. Secret and Stephen stood together in the ethereal library. Stephen raised his hand and confidently called out, Sidorak natured spells. Immediately, a red, leather-bound tome flew through the air and landed in his hand, emanating a faint crimson glow. You see, not only did I manage to get Wanda out of that crystal, he said with a proud smirk, I also tricked a dimensional lord into letting me access his realm without him realizing it. Now, I can finally use the spells I was most interested in learning, the bands of Sidorak. Secret, however, seemed unimpressed, her expression one of practiced disinterest as she strolled past him. She reached a nearby ladder, climbed up, and pulled a book from a high shelf, ignoring Stephen as she began to examine it. Stephen watched her, raising an eyebrow in confusion as she climbed down and headed to her usual reading spot without sparing him a second glance. Secret! He called, following after her, unsure why she was giving him the cold shoulder. With a soft huff, Secret leaped up onto a small table, scooting back, pointedly ignoring him. Stephen sighed, exasperated. What did I do this time? Secret snapped her book open a bit too forcefully, holding it up to cover her face. You're 500 years old and acting like a child. He muttered, rolling his eyes. She lowered her book just enough to shoot him a glare. Not letting her attitude deter him, Stephen stepped closer, pulling the book from her hands, meeting her gaze with a serious expression. Use your words, he said, his voice firm. Why are you acting this way? She scoffed, looking away, then finally muttered, why are you even bothering with me? Shouldn't you be talking to one of your many other women? Ever since you became a magic knight, it's like you're collecting them. Noelle, Vanessa, not to mention your fiancé, and now there's Wanda. Stephen had to turn away, stifling a laugh as he covered his mouth. Is something I said funny? Secret asked, her tone icy. He shook his head, failing to keep a smirk off his face. I'm sorry, I just need a second. Secret. Nero Swallowtail is jealous. I've seen it all now. He chuckled. My middle name isn't Nero. Secret snapped, cheeks flushed. And I am not jealous. Stephen looked at her more seriously now. Have I done something to make you feel like this? Secret turned her face away, her voice barely a whisper. No, that's because I'm not jealous. Stephen let out a frustrated sigh. I just don't understand you, Secret. Wasn't it you who pushed me away not too long ago? And now you're acting like this. What are you talking about? Secret asked, looking stunned. Don't pretend you don't remember, he said, his irritation evident. When I was testing the Eye of Agamotto we shared something, a real moment. And then you pushed me away. That hurt, you know. Her expression softened, and she bit her lip, looking down. You don't understand, Stephen. I'm 500 years old, a bird, cursed to be as such for many more years, and all I could ever be to you is your pet, your familiar. One day, I'll have to watch you grow old, fall in love, have a family, and then, die. And I'll remain just, me. A bird, a familiar, a relic of a past age. Getting closer to you means just that much more heartache down the line. She took a shaky breath, struggling to maintain her composure. I shouldn't get jealous. It's not my place, but I can't help it. Watching you with other people, it hurts. In that moment, Stephen leaned forward and silenced her with a gentle kiss, catching her entirely off guard. Her eyes fluttered shut as a tear slipped down her cheek, and she pressed her forehead to his, her voice trembling. You're cruel, Stephen Strange. So very cruel. He looked into her tear-filled eyes, his voice low but resolute. I won't let that happen, he vowed, brushing a thumb across her cheek. I won't let you suffer like that. She placed her hands on either side of his face, searching his eyes. How can I believe that? I'm scared, Stephen. A sorcerer's word is his bond, he said softly, holding her gaze with a solemn promise. If I say I'll make it happen, I will. Secret closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his once more, her grip tightening as she whispered, Please don't let me lose you. I can't bear the thought of it. Don't lie to me. Chapter 47, Strange Artifacts. Third Person's POV. In the quiet stillness of the ancient library, Stephen's arm wrapped around Secret's waist as she perched on the edge of a grand oak table. Her hands gently cupped his cheeks, their faces mere inches apart. The only sound that filled the vast, magical chamber was the soft, rhythmic smacking of their lips as they lost themselves in each other's kiss. As they broke apart to catch their breath, a faint smile touched both their lips. Their faces remained close, each breath mingling, the intimacy of the moment hanging heavily between them. Secret was the first to break the silence, her voice soft yet tinged with a bashful note. This wasn't quite how I pictured my day turning out, she admitted, her cheeks a delicate shade of pink. Stephen smirked, his tone teasing. Want to know something interesting? Right now, it's not just us, it's our souls touching, practically kissing each other. Makes this moment all the more intimate, don't you think? Secret's eyes widened, a hint of surprise flashing through her expression. I never thought of it that way. Her gaze softened, her fingers lightly tracing his cheek before drifting over his lips. Slowly, she pulled him closer, whispering, You're right, this is much more intimate. Their lips met again, the kiss deepening as they surrendered to the unspoken pull between them. When they finally broke apart, Stephen slumped back into the chair, catching his breath. Secret remained on the table, swinging her legs with a contented expression. Noticing Stephen's pensive look, her playful smile faded, replaced by concern. Are you thinking about Mimosa? She asked softly, reading the trace of guilt that marred his expression. Stephen sighed, unable to hide his thoughts. Is it that obvious? He grumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Secret raised an eyebrow, a gentle but knowing smile tugging at her lips. It's written all over your face. Stephen's shoulders slumped. I can't help feeling guilty. After telling her I wouldn't annul the engagement, here I am, making out with you. It feels wrong, like I'm a scumbag. We even said if either of us fell for someone else, we'd call it off. And that was just a few minutes ago. You're right, Secret replied bluntly, her expression unreadable. You are a scumbag. Stephen groaned, burying his face in his hands. Ugh. But then Secret's face softened, and a small smile appeared. Still, just because we have this, she gestured between them, doesn't mean you have to end the engagement. At least, I don't want you to. Stephen's eyes widened in surprise. Excuse me? A minute ago, you were practically glaring at the thought of me with someone else. Secret shook her head, a faint blush dusting her cheeks. I wasn't jealous that you were with someone else. Back in my time, mistresses and concubines were common. I wasn't expecting anything formal. I just envied that others could be with you openly, while I had to settle for being by your side as a bird. Her gaze dropped momentarily. That's what bothered me. To punctuate her words, she pressed her foot playfully against his chest, pushing him back. Besides, I want you to keep your options open. Just in case, well, in case I stay stuck in this form. Imagine telling people you're in love with a bird. They'd think you'd lost it. She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head at the absurdity. Stephen caught her foot, playfully swatting it aside. He leaned in, placing his hands on either side of her, effectively caging her in. Didn't I say I'd find a way to fix this? Secret rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her soft smile as she brushed a stray strand of his white hair back. Consider it insurance. Stephen sighed, shaking his head. Some insurance. I doubt Mimosa would appreciate being thought of that way. Secret's smile turned mischievous as she wrapped her legs around his waist, mirroring his previous motion. Sounds like you're already attached to her. Seems like Mimosa's more than just insurance. Stephen gave a reluctant nod. She's my fiancée, it would be wrong not to care. And she's genuinely nice. I don't want to hurt her. Secret's hand slid up to his neck, her touch soft, her eyes gleaming with warmth. You're adorable. Without waiting, she pulled him into another kiss, letting herself enjoy the moment. When they finally separated, both of them were left with messy hair and the faint remnants of shared warmth. Secret adjusted her spaghetti strap, letting out a satisfied sigh as Stephen ran a hand through his tousled hair. He leaned back into his chair, pulling out a spellbook he had been studying, an ancient, thick tome marked with symbols from the Crimson Dimension. Secret cleared her throat, a playful spark in her eyes. So you managed to trick a dimensional lord? Stephen smirked, flipping through the pages. Yeah, I convinced him to break Wanda free from her crystal, plus let me draw from his dimension's power. Downside is, I need to invoke his name to use the spells, or he won't lend me his strength. Secret leaned forward, intrigued. How did you manage that? I appealed to his nature, both godly and demonic, Stephen said with a hint of pride. They're both drawn to attention and praise. Secret hummed, impressed. Smart. Do you have to use any hand signs? Nope. Just his name and the spell name. Easier and quicker in combat. A grin spread across his face as he continued, clearly excited. The spells from his dimension are unique, indestructible when cast correctly. Take the bands of Sidorak, for example. They produce these unbreakable bonds that could restrain even the strongest of foes. I was thinking if I could wrap those bands around my arms, they'd serve as both armor and a way to amplify my strikes. Secret tapped her chin thoughtfully, impressed. That's clever, I wouldn't have thought of using it that way. With a shared smile, Stephen opened the book on the table, settling beside Secret as they both delved back into their studies. The vast library returned to its quiet, magical stillness. After an hour in the real world, Stephen and Nero both opened their eyes. Nero nuzzled his face against Stephen's cheek before fluttering up to perch on the bed's headboard. Stretching his arms, Stephen gently set his grimoire down at the foot of the bed. All right, he murmured, time to organize everything I retrieved from the dungeon. Stephen approached a shelf he had recently set up specifically for magical artifacts, grabbing Dragon Fang, his newly acquired sword. He carefully placed it across two custom holders, one gripping the hilt and the other cradling the blade. Dragon Fang, he explained to Nero, who was watching with curious eyes. A magical sword with the abilities of indestructibility, magic absorption, barrier negation, weapon skill enhancement, recall, and, believe it or not, the power to command winged horses. Nero tilted his head, clearly intrigued. Next, Stephen opened a portal to the mirror dimension and returned moments later, holding a large, ancient-looking orb. He set it down in the center of his shelves. This is the Orb of Agamotto, also known as the Earthly Scanner. It's used for scrying, detecting danger, sending telepathic messages, and even peering into other dimensions. Going back into the mirror dimension, he reappeared with a heavy, intricately adorned cauldron. And this is the cauldron of the cosmos. It lets me dwell on the mysteries of the universe. It's mainly for consultation and scrying. Lastly, he gestured to a long yellow-orange sash that was wrapped around his waist. This sash can extend up to 10 times its length. It could come in handy for binding or as an extension of my own reach. These are the essentials, he continued, nodding at Nero, though there are a few other items, they aren't as important as the one I retrieved. There's a wine glass that magically refills itself every time you take a drink. I'll put those away for now. As Stephen finished reorganizing his room, a soft knock interrupted his focus. He flicked his wrist, causing the door to open magically, and found Wanda standing there. She wore a light nightgown, clutching a pillow and a blanket to her chest. Stephen couldn't help but smirk. Did you perhaps have a nightmare? He teased, clearly amused. Wanda flushed, casting her eyes downward. I didn't want to sleep alone, she admitted in a small voice. It's just the idea of being in a room by myself feels too strange. Seeing her vulnerability, Stephen's expression softened, and he opened the door wider. Come on in, he said gently. Wanda entered, and the door closed quietly behind her. The room, with its glow of ancient artifacts and the faint scent of parchment and magic, felt cozy and inviting. Wanda set her pillow and blanket on a nearby chair, looking slightly embarrassed but visibly more at ease. Stephen took a moment to adjust the settings on a small candle-like orb by his bed, filling the room with a warm, comforting light. Feel free to make yourself comfortable, he offered, gesturing to the spare blankets on his bed. She gave him a small smile, settling onto the edge of the bed. Thank you, Stephen. Chapter 48, Strange Morning Training. Third Person's POV. Stephen's astral projection floated above his body as his grimoire hovered in front of him. His physical body lay below him, resting. He soon detected movement, causing him to turn and look. Wanda had rolled over and began spooning him, making him chuckle in amusement at the sight. He shook his head and returned to reading his grimoire, occasionally glancing over at Wanda as she shifted a lot in her sleep. Now that her body was free from its confinement, it didn't seem to want to stay still. The next morning, Wanda woke up abruptly, sitting up and looking around with half-closed eyes in confusion. Her hair was messy, with a few strands hanging near her mouth. Hey! She asked groggily. Where am I? She muttered, her head moving side to side as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Oh, what I would pay to be able to take a picture of this moment, Stephen sighed. Wanda turned toward the voice to find Stephen sitting in a comfortable armchair with a book in hand. Wanda blushed upon seeing Stephen, finally remembering where she was. Well, this is just embarrassing. Stephen closed his book and stood up, setting it down on the armrest. Just get ready. Everyone has breakfast together in the morning. I'll leave you to it, he said with a chuckle as his cloak flew to his shoulders and he exited, closing the door behind him. Wanda soon joined everyone, wearing clothes Vanessa had made for her, mostly in scarlet to match her hair, with the Black Bull's insignia featured prominently. After breakfast, Stephen was in the training area with Noelle, helping her work on her magic. Due to the nature of water magic, it's one of the easiest elements to manipulate structurally, so that's what we're going to focus on to help you control your magic. Plus, we'll make this training fun, which should help as well. Noelle's eyebrows knitted in confusion, but Stephen waved her off. You'll see as we go along. Can you make bubbles? What kind of stupid question is that? Noelle asked, offended. So, can you? Stephen asked, already exasperated. I can, but only with my wand, Noelle muttered as she held out her wand, and bubbles began to form at its tip before popping. How fast can you do it? Noelle thought about it, then held out her wand and conjured a stream of bubbles. How does this help? What am I going to do, bubble someone to death? If you had great control over your magic, you could conjure a giant bubble that doesn't pop and use it to fly around, Stephen said with a straight face. Noelle blinked. Could I really do that? That's the beauty of magic, anything is possible. This is why we're training your control so you can one day do it. Now, conjure a water ball. Noelle nodded, determined. She held her wand out, and a ball of water appeared at its tip. Don't fire it. Now, I want you to change its shape. Try making it into a fish, Stephen instructed. Noelle gripped her wand and concentrated, causing the ball to tremble and shift before snapping back. She grunted, focusing harder. You can wave your wand like you're drawing it. A mental image will help a lot. Noelle nodded, waving her wand. At first, she moved the ball back and forth, then it gradually took on the shape of a fish tail. Finally, with deep concentration, she formed the water into a fish. Whoa, I actually did it. Stephen smiled. Now drop it and try again until you can do it with a single wave. Noelle hesitated to release her creation but did as he instructed. Each time she tried, it became easier. After 20 minutes, she waved her wand, and a complete fish appeared. I did it! She exclaimed, jumping with excitement. Now, I want you to control that fish. Don't just send it flying, actively control its movements. I think I get it. Noelle began moving her wand slowly, guiding the fish to swim in various directions. Ha, this is quite fun. Stephen moved his hands in circles, summoning sparks around them, drawing shapes in the air. I want you to walk your fish. Excuse me. Did I stutter? Noelle stared at Stephen before moving her water construct through the makeshift obstacle course. She started cautiously, her control a bit shaky, but soon the fish began moving more fluidly as she guided it with her wand, eyes following it intently until she completed the course. I'm getting good at this, she said smugly. Need I remind you what happened last time you got cocky? Noelle glared at him. You just can't let me have this achievement, can you? Stephen shrugged. Someone has to keep you humble. Now, come on. Let's keep making different shapes and constructs. Dash. A while later, Noelle was moving happily in a circle as a large school of fish swam around her, controlled by her wand. She laughed as she waved her arm above her head. Ha ha ha. This is so cool. Her magic was so impressive that her grimoire began to lift, floating in front of her. As she continued, she sent the school of fish charging forward, causing small explosions upon impact. A new page appeared in her grimoire, displaying an image of the school of fish. She grabbed her grimoire, jumping up and down with excitement, her pigtails bouncing. Stephen! Stephen! Look! I made my own original spell. Unable to contain her joy, she hugged him. Thank you! Thank you! Thank you! She looked up to see him watching her in amusement, making her freeze. She quickly pulled away, coughing. I mean, it's only natural I'd create my own spell. I am royalty, after all, she said, trying to sound smug, though her excitement couldn't be hidden. Noelle gazed at her grimoire with a soft smile, running her hand over the new page, a testament to all her hard work over the years. Afterward, Stephen and Asta stood facing each other, a slight breeze rustling the leaves around them. Asta, gripping his brand new sword with a casual yet determined stance, gave Stephen a wry smile. Are you sure you want to do this? Stephen lifted his forearm to his face, which, like his arms, were wrapped in layers of deep red bandages that glowed faintly with otherworldly energy. Just do it and stop being a coward. I've already cast a time spell in case things go south. Asta took a steadying breath and then grinned with renewed intensity. Fine. You asked for this. Don't blame me if something bad happens. With a powerful swing, Asta slashed his sword directly toward Stephen's arms. The sword connected with the crimson bands of Sidorak in a fierce clash that sent a sharp, metallic ring echoing across the yard. Shockingly, Asta's sword was ripped from his hands, deflecting off the enchanted bands, and plunged into the ground a few feet away. Whoa! It worked! Asta gasped, his eyes wide as he quickly moved to retrieve his sword, yanking it from the earth. But, my sword can cut through magic. Why didn't it work? He muttered in confusion, examining his weapon closely. Stephen smirked, lowering his arms. Because I'm summoning them with magic, not actually creating them, he explained with a confident gleam in his eye. Without missing a beat, Stephen raised his right hand toward the window of his bedroom. The window burst open with a sharp snap, and his sword, Dragon Fang, shot out, soaring through the air to land perfectly in his grip. He twisted the weapon skillfully, passing it along his forearm, causing sparks to spark as the indestructible items met while he locked eyes with Asta. Sparks of anticipation and competitive energy crackled between them. Shall we begin? Stephen asked, his voice low and edged with challenge. Asta's face lit up. I was born ready. He shouted, charging forward with his sword raised high. Stephen met him head-on, sprinting forward with Dragon Fang at the ready. They clashed fiercely, their movements swift and powerful as they danced across the yard, each trying to gain an edge over the other. Their swords collided in a series of fast, brutal strikes, the sound of metal against metal ringing in the crisp morning air. Stephen moved with a graceful precision, his every move enhanced by the magic of Dragon Fang, granting him the skill of a seasoned swordsman. Asta, however, was the real deal as he had honed his skills through years of relentless training. Minutes turned into hours as they pushed each other to the limit, neither willing to back down. Eventually, though, Stephen's stamina began to wane, his breathing becoming labored while Asta still seemed ready to go on for hours. Reluctantly, they decided to call it a day, both of them grinning as they caught their breath, satisfied with the intensity of their sparring. Later, Stephen moved on to his next training partner, Wanda. He found her waiting nearby, her face a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Wanda's powers were raw, untamed, and she lacked a proper understanding of her abilities, not even knowing the full extent of her magic or its true nature. Patiently, Stephen guided her through basic techniques, helping her channel her energy more effectively. Magic is about control, he said, demonstrating simple spells. If you can focus and understand it, it won't control you. Wanda's powers flickered, a mix of red and pink energy sparking around her hands as she tried to focus. Slowly, under Stephen's guidance, she began to find her rhythm, her confidence growing with each attempt. They worked together until the sun was low in the sky, both exhausted but invigorated by their progress. Chapter 49, Strange Dungeon Report, 1. Third Person's POV. A week had passed since Stephen and his team had conquered the dungeon. This morning, as they casually gathered over breakfast, Yami glanced at them with his usual nonchalant expression and attitude. The Magic Knight's headquarters wants a full report on what went down in that dungeon, he informed them, his voice gruff. Then, with a nod toward Wanda, he added, "Oh, and take Wanda with you. I've already spoken with the Wizard King about her, but he wants to see her in person before deciding anything." Stephen raised an eyebrow, glancing at Wanda. She seemed visibly tense at the idea of meeting the Wizard King, her fingers fidgeting with her breakfast spoon. The Wizard King? We're going to meet the Wizard King? Woohoo! Asta burst out, his mouth half full of food, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Yami's gaze shifted to Luck. "You're staying here. I'm sending you on a mission with Magna," he stated, brooking no argument. As Stephen, Noelle, Asta, and Wanda quickly finished their food, they began to gather their things. Once everyone was ready, Stephen summoned a portal, its swirling light casting a glow across the room. They stepped through, and in an instant, they were transported to the bustling Clover capital. Whoa! Asta breathed, eyes wide with amazement. This was his first time in the capital, and the grand towers and lively streets left him awestruck. Wanda, too, seemed captivated, her gaze darting around, taking in the sights with a childlike wonder. It was her first time outside the Black Bull's base, and every detail seemed to spark her curiosity. As they made their way through the streets, they crossed paths with Yuno and his team, who were also headed to the Magic Knight's headquarters. Yuno and his teammates turned, spotting Stephen's group. A smile broke across Mimosa's face, and without hesitation, she ran over to Stephen. "Stephen!" she greeted, throwing herself into his arms in a spontaneous hug. The group paused, staring at the two of them, and Mimosa quickly realized all eyes were on her. She stepped back, clearing her throat as a faint blush colored her cheeks. "So how have you all been?" she asked, trying to cover her embarrassment. Noelle's eyebrow arched, and she crossed her arms, her voice tinged with a hint of annoyance. "You two seem awfully close for people who only found out about their engagement a week ago." Wanda observed them silently, her gaze narrowing slightly as she watched Stephen and Mimosa. "So this is the fiancé," she thought. Klaus chimed in, looking between Stephen and Mimosa with a raised brow. "Yes, that hug seemed rather friendly for a relationship that's barely a week old." Mimosa's cheeks flushed an even deeper red, and she placed her hands over them, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Well, Stephen has been visiting my room at night since the dungeon incident. We've had time to get to know each other," she admitted shyly. Everyone stared at them in shock, jaws dropping. Klaus stammered, "That's quite a development." Asta clapped Stephen on the back repeatedly, grinning. "Stephen, you sly dog. Already settling into married life, hey?" Stephen groaned, covering his face with his hands. The attention and teasing made him wish for invisibility. Mimosa, flustered by everyone's reactions, began to panic, waving her hands frantically. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that Stephen's been sneaking into my room at night. All we did was lay in bed together." Stephen's face went bright red, and he quickly put a hand over her mouth. "Mimosa, please stop talking," he pleaded, his ears practically glowing with embarrassment. Mimosa nodded rapidly, her cheeks flushed, steam almost visibly rising from her head in mortification. Klaus shot Stephen a stern look. "So you've been sneaking into our base?" Stephen shrugged, trying to play it off. "It's quite easy, actually." Noelle stood slightly apart, looking away with a strange, unreadable expression. She placed a hand over her chest, her face conflicted. Why does it hurt to see them together like that? Am I getting sick? She wondered, feeling a pang she couldn't quite understand. Eventually, everyone agreed to put the awkwardness behind them and continued on toward the Magic Knight's headquarters. As they approached the grand building, a voice called out, "Over here." They turned to see the Wizard King, Julius Novacrano, waving them over. Klaus's eyes widened, and he dropped to one knee in awe. "Sir, I never dreamed you'd meet with us directly." "Who's the fancy dude?" Asta asked, cocking his head. Stephen leaned over to him, whispering, "That's the Wizard King, Julius Novacrano." Asta's face lit up with excitement, while Yuno's eyes widened in surprise. Julius approached with a smile, addressing Stephen. "It's good to see you again. How have you been?" Stephen let out a sigh, a note of irritation in his voice. "Could be better if certain decisions about my life weren't made without my knowledge or consent," he replied, shooting a pointed look at Julius. "Stephen! Show respect. That's the Wizard King." Klaus whispered urgently. But Julius raised a hand, stopping Klaus. "I take it you're still a bit angry about recent events." Stephen rolled his eyes, arms crossed. "What gave it away?" Klaus was practically pleading with his gaze for Stephen to stop, but Julius only smiled apologetically. "I truly am sorry. It was a request from Aurelia. She offered to bear the responsibility and any backlash for what happened." Stephen sighed, rubbing the back of his head. "I'm not furious, just annoyed. Just consult me next time if it's something as big as my future, all right?" Julius's expression softened with genuine regret. "Understood. I'll remember that." They soon found themselves in one of the tall towers, standing before the Wizard King as he examined Yuno's grimoire. His eyes sparkled with curiosity and excitement as he examined the intricate symbols of Yuno's wind spirit spell. "This is impressive. This spell might be the most valuable relic recovered from that dungeon." Stephen leaned over to Wanda, whispering, "It's not." Wanda chuckled softly, knowing he was referring to her, the true treasure they had brought back. Curiosity filled Yuno's face. "Can you read it, sir?" he asked. "To some extent," Julius replied, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. He looked back at Yuno, his voice brimming with anticipation. "Say, could you perform the spell for me now?" Yuno's face fell slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. I managed to activate it once in the dungeon, but I haven't been able to use it since." Julius's hopeful expression dimmed, a single tear forming at the corner of his eye. "I see, what a shame." He closed the grimoire gently, handing it back to Yuno with a warm smile. "But take heart, this spell will grow with you. One day, it will become a truly extraordinary power. Take good care of it," he said, his gaze lingering on Yuno with respect. "The great wind spirit Sylph," he thought, "it has chosen him for this era." Chapter 50, Strange Dungeon Report, 2. Third Person's POV. Asta stepped forward, determination in his eyes as he opened his grimoire and held it toward the Wizard King. His voice rang out, clear and forceful. "Wizard King. Some strange writing appeared in my grimoire too." Julius raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He leaned in, squinting to examine the text closely, then rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I can't read it. I've never seen this kind of writing in any document before." Asta's face filled with excitement as he flipped through the grimoire's pages, which began to glow. Suddenly, a sword handle materialized from within. He grasped it and drew out a massive, new sword, showcasing it with pride. "This sword came out of my grimoire." Julius's eyes sparkled with fascination as he observed the weapon. "Anti-magic power," he murmured, his expression alight with wonder. May I touch it?" Asta knelt, offering the sword like a knight presenting a blade to his king. Julius carefully took the sword, but the weight almost pulled him forward. "Whoa!" he gasped, barely managing to keep his balance. "It's so heavy." "Are you all right, Wizard King?" Klaus called out with concern. Julius laughed, shaking his head in admiration. "I'm impressed you managed to swing this around." He stopped abruptly as he felt a strange sensation. "It's absorbing my magic." He handed the sword back to Asta, smiling with newfound respect. "This sword is incredible. I don't think anyone but you, someone without magic, could wield it." Finally, Julius turned to Wanda, his gaze both curious and cautious. "So, you're the young woman Stephen discovered sealed within a crystal in the dungeon?" Klaus's jaw dropped. "He did what? We didn't see her in there." That's because Stephen worked in secret, Noelle replied, rolling her eyes at Klaus's surprise. Julius continued, giving Wanda a warm smile. May I ask your name, young lady? Wanda hesitated, half hiding behind Stephen before stepping forward and speaking softly. Wanda. Wanda Maximoff. Julius nodded, his curiosity intensifying. So you're from an ancient time before grimoires even existed. Is that correct? Wanda nodded again. This grimoire concept is completely new to me. It's incredible how standard it is here, she admitted, sounding both intrigued and mystified. The spark in Julius's eyes brightened further. Magic from a different era. I wonder what it's like. Could you show me? Wanda glanced at Stephen, who gave her an encouraging nod. She stepped back, took a deep breath, and raised her hands. Red orbs of energy began to swirl in her palms, glowing with a mysterious, chaotic light. Slowly, she started to rise off the ground, her movements wobbly and unsteady. I'm still practicing, but I'm getting better, she said, managing a small smile as she hovered briefly before lowering herself back to the ground. Julius watched with rapt attention, a serious look on his face, though the spark in his eyes never faded. Your magic has a chaotic feel to it. Is that because it's ancient, or is it unique to you? Regardless, Yami's vouched for you, and now as a member of his squad, I officially welcome you to the Clover Kingdom and the Magic Knights. Wanda smiled, bowing respectfully. Thank you very much. Julius looked around at the group with a proud smile. At any rate, well done, all of you. Asta stepped forward, his nervousness evident as he struggled to form his words. You Wizard King. Can I ask you a question? Julius tilted his head, intrigued. What's on your mind? Taking a deep breath, Asta looked at Yuno, who stepped forward beside him. Together, they asked in unison, how does someone become the Wizard King? Julius blinked in surprise, then laughed heartily. I see. So you both aim to become the Wizard King. All Magic Knights should have such ambition. Klaus adjusted his glasses, chastising the pair with a stern tone. It's rude to ask the Wizard King such a direct question, you two. Listen to me, a Wizard King must have a noble heart and the trust of the people. No. Julius's tone was suddenly serious, his face now devoid of its usual carefree warmth. It's merit. Asta and Yuno stared, wide-eyed as Julius continued. You can't protect people with pride alone. Trust comes only after you've proven yourself. People look to the Wizard King for one thing, achievements that prove you're the strongest. Dedicate yourselves to that. Build a reputation. That's everything. Without that, no one can stand at the top. Determination burned in Asta and Yuno's eyes as they clenched their fists. Bring it on! They both shouted. Julius smiled, pleased to see their resolve. Ha ha ha, well then. In fact, we'll soon be holding a ceremony for Magic Knights who have earned an outstanding number of stars. I hope to see you both there. Asta and Yuno exchanged glances, excitement and anticipation lighting up their faces. Wait, a ceremony? They echoed as Julius led them down the hall. Meanwhile, Wanda noticed Stephen lingering behind, deep in thought, his gaze unfocused. She nudged him gently. Stephen. He blinked, snapping back to the present. What's up? You've been staring off into space. What's wrong? Stephen rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his brow furrowing. It's, well, just a feeling. When you used your magic just now, I sensed something, watching us. It vanished before I could get a read on it. Wanda's eyes widened slightly. I felt it too. I thought I was imagining things. Stephen gave her a serious look. Be careful, all right. Wanda smirked, flashing him a peace sign. Don't worry. I've got you watching my back, right? Stephen chuckled, the tension easing a bit as Julius opened the grand doors to the hall, where the assembled Magic Knights awaited. There were both Magic Knights and Magic Knight captains standing in two different rows. All right, Julius said as he stepped forwards, can you give me better results than them? Chapter 51, Strange Magic Knight Confrontation. Third Person's POV. On the left side of the room stood the Silver Eagle Squad, with two members and their captain, along with a member of the Blue Rose and their captain. Opposite them were a member of the Crimson Lion, their captain, and three members of the Golden Dawn. Julius went to the grand seat in front of everyone and announced, now then, let the distinguished service ceremony begin. He began calling out names, squad affiliations, star counts, achievements, and new rankings. He called upon Leopold Vermilion, a member of the Crimson Lion and younger brother of Crimson Lion leader Fuego Leon, Sol Marone of the Blue Rose Knights, Nebra Silva and Solid Silva of the Silver Eagle, and finally Alec-Dora Sandler, Sharon Tiam and Haman Cassius of the Golden Dawn. After finishing the announcements, Julius turned to everyone with a smile. Well done, all of you. All right, everyone, we've got a simple reception set up, so enjoy yourselves. He then added, oh right, I forgot to mention, we have some special guests with us today. Make sure to get to know each other well. Everyone turned to see Stephen and the others standing awkwardly until Stephen gave a small wave with a smile. Noelle immediately grabbed his hand and pulled it down, glaring. What the hell do you think you're doing? She whispered harshly. I panicked. They were all staring at us, I thought waving was at least polite. Stephen whispered back, embarrassed. They soon found themselves in a large ballroom filled with tables and food, though the Wizard King seemed to have other plans and had left. Noelle looked down anxiously without saying much, while Stephen, Asta, and Wanda were simply enjoying the food. Oh my god! Stephen, Wanda, you should try the meat, it's so good! Asta exclaimed, stuffing his face. Talk about high-class stuff, Stephen remarked, eating casually. Wanda was more reserved but seemed to enjoy the food as much. Mimosa approached Stephen shyly. Mind if I join you? Not at all, go ahead, Stephen replied, scooting over. They overheard murmurs. Vulgar peasants, someone muttered. Why would the Wizard King invite such lowborn scum? I can't sense any magic from that rat. The dungeon capture must have been sheer luck. Just look at how they eat, disgusting. It's unnatural for commoners like them to be here misfits. Wanda and Mimosa looked uncomfortable, but when they glanced at Stephen and Asta, they found them chuckling to each other. Wow, they really are gunning for you, hey, Asta, Stephen teased as he chuckled. Hee, hey, they're talking about you too, you know, Asta replied, food in his mouth. Seeing their nonchalant demeanor, the others blinked in surprise. Your squad has its own peasant, doesn't it? Leopold said with a smirk. A peasant celebrated for having a four-leaf grimoire, yet who doesn't know his place? Leopold smirked at a Golden Dawn member. I would have handled that dungeon capture mission much better. Impressive self-confidence, Crimson Brat. Not that we expect much from a peasant like him. We're the ones who truly embody the Golden Dawn ideals, Alec-Dora said coldly, looking at Leopold. Asta and Yuno stared quietly while Stephen picked up a small dessert. If I could just say Klaus began, only for Alec-Dora to interrupt. You too, Klaus. With your skills and talent, aren't you ashamed to be here? He turned to Mimosa. Mimosa, I heard you not only got wounded early in the dungeon and had to leave the front lines. But you're also engaged to a peasant. You, a Vermilion royal ridiculous, ludicrous. Mimosa looked down. I'm terribly sorry. Oi, oi. If I were you, I'd watch who you're talking to like that, Stephen said, setting down his treat. You can talk all you want about me, but I won't let you speak to her that way, he added, dusting off his hands and glaring coldly. Stephen, it's all right, Mimosa said, appreciative but shaking her head. No, it's not all right. No one talks to you that way when I'm around, Stephen retorted. Who the hell do you think you are? Just because you were born into nobility do you think you get to treat and talk to people like that, especially when that person is my fiancé? Newsflash, it doesn't. Stephen Mimosa muttered, touched. Before Alec-Dora could retort, someone else interjected. He, let's not get sidetracked. If we're talking about misfits, it's you, isn't it, Noelle? A record-breaking embarrassment who can't even control her magic properly. Big brother solid, Noelle muttered, anxiety increasing. Another snicker followed. You were practically exiled from the Silva family. I'm surprised you had the nerve to return to the noble realm. Big sister Nebra. Noelle's anxiety grew with every word. A third figure stepped forward. Excited over a single success, did you come to bring shame to the Silva name? You don't belong here. Leave this place, you failure. Stephen and Asta both snapped, veins visible on their foreheads as they gritted their teeth. Big brother Noelle began to shake with fear. She bit her lip and tried to walk away, tear pooling around her eyes, but Stephen grabbed her arm, stopping her. You don't have to run, especially not from bastards like these. They don't deserve a single tear from you, he said, his face contorted in rage as his blue eyes glowed bright gold. Meanwhile, Asta jumped onto a table, clenching his fist. Since you were called here, I thought you'd be amazing people. Guess I was wrong. You're no different from everyone else. Who cares if we belong or not? Just watch, I'm gonna. Sand-binding magic, sandbox. Alec-Dora activated his magic, saying, That's far enough, scoundrel. A gnat like you shouldn't be permitted to speak. Silence. As he hurled his magic towards Asta, Stephen's hand suddenly appeared in front of his face, taking him by surprise. He grabbed Alec-Dora by the face and slammed him to the ground with enough force to crack the marble floor. Everyone was shocked, they hadn't even seen him move. That was for Mimosa, Stephen said as magic circles glowed around his legs and forearms, while Asta drew his sword, nullifying Alec-Dora's spell with a single slash of his sword. I'm not shutting up. I'm going to stack up results until I become the Wizard King and silence every single one of you. Asta shouted, pointing his sword at everyone. Stephen then became a golden blur, appearing before Nozel. Now apologize. He demanded, his golden eyes blazing as he stood protectively in front of Noel. Become Wizard King. Solid and Nabur repeated, then burst out laughing. Their grimoires activated as they shouted, Don't be ridiculous. Water binding magic, sea serpent's coil. Mist binding magic, mist spider threads. As the massive spells charged towards Asta, he swung his sword in a wide arc, dispelling them in one slash and creating a powerful gust of wind. As the gust passed Nozel and Stephen, Nozel's hair whipped back, while Stephen's cloak billowed behind him. Nozel released a crushing amount of mana pressure, enough to force most people to their knees. Do you think that just because you took down a regular magic knight, you can contend with a captain? Such arrogance! Nozel was surprised to see Stephen standing firm, unaffected by the mana pressure. Stephen, in turn, unleashed his own, creating a powerful wind as golden mana flared around him, the sound of his cloak flapping apparent. No, it's not to show I could defeat you, but to show what happens when someone disrespects those I care about, Stephen said as sparks flew between his golden mana and Nozel's silver one. Nozel's eyes twitched in annoyance as he intensified his pressure, and a large silver eagle appeared behind him. I retaliate, Stephen declared, his pressure increasing as everything began to shake. His golden magic circles glowed, his cloak flapping in the growing wind. His mana pressure solidified, creating a towering figure of himself with multiple arms, each performing a different hand sign around him, one arm crossed over his chest, and a hand holding up two fingers in front of his giant face. Its eyes were closed except for a third eye in the middle of its forehead. So before I show you what true retaliation looks like, apologize for what you said to Noelle, Stephen demanded coldly. Because she's far from a failure. Noelle placed a hand over her mouth, tears welling up. Stephen. Mimosa smiled slightly, looking over at Noelle, her smile then turned slightly weary towards the end when she saw the look Noelle was giving him, and honestly she couldn't blame her. Chapter 52, Strange Attack on the Capital, 1. Third Person's POV. Nozel glared down at the two magic knights before him, his expression cold and imperious, an intimidating aura radiating from him like a suffocating wave. Two peasants who dare to defy royalty. I wonder how should I punish you both? His voice dripped with contempt, each word sharpened by his overwhelming magical pressure. Stephen, however, didn't flinch. He met Nozel's glare with unwavering resolve. When are you going to get it through that thick skull of yours? Stephen retorted, his voice calm yet steely. Our social standing isn't what's important here. What's important is that you still owe an apology. Before Nozel could respond, a third magical pressure filled the air, blazing like an inferno as Fuegoleon stepped between them. His mana took on the form of a fiery lion, its mane crackling with embers. That's enough from both of you, he said, his voice commanding as he fixed Nozel with a disappointed look. All of this, over two young magic knights? Aren't you ashamed of yourself, Silva clan? Nozel's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Leopold strode forward with a broad grin, his gaze fixed on Asta and Stephen. Mimosa told me a bit about you too, he said, admiration gleaming in his eyes. I've got to say, I'm impressed. You both have earned my respect. Then, with a booming laugh, Leopold threw an arm over his chest and declared, all right. Ha ha ha. I have decided. From this moment forward, I, Leopold Vermilion, declare you two my rivals. Stephen paid him little mind, his piercing gaze still locked onto Nozel, who looked back with disdain. You know, standing nearby, felt his eyebrow twitch as someone else claimed Asta as a rival. Fuego Leon, meanwhile, continued his lecture, his eyes stern as he addressed Nozel. Lord Julius allowed them to be here. Some may be commoners, but they've proven themselves worthy. Give them the credit they deserve. Nozel scoffed, a sneer curling his lips. I never thought I'd hear those words from another royal. The Vermilion House must have grown soft. Tell me, what respect should an eagle soaring through the sky have for an insect crawling on the ground? In an instant, Stephen's patience snapped. In a flash, his fist connected with Nozel's jaw, sending the royal sliding backward across the polished marble floor. Nozel skidded to a stop, dropping to one knee as blood trickled down his lips. His usually pristine silver hair fell messily over his face, and his glare was murderous as he wiped the blood off with his thumb, smirking before licking it clean. The room went silent, everyone staring at Stephen, who stood with his shoulders squared and eyes icy, his fist still clenched. Look at that, he sneered, voice cold. This insect just brought you down to the ground with the rest of us. Big brother Nozel. Solid and Nabra shouted, rushing to his side. Nearby, Mimosa and Noel looked on, stunned into silence, while Klaus's mouth hung open, his glasses precariously dangling from his nose. Fuego Leon shot Stephen a disapproving glare. Violence was unnecessary. I had the situation under control. Stephen scoffed, crossing his arms defiantly. So what? Just because you had it under control, I should have let him keep running his mouth? I don't care who he is. If he keeps talking like that, I'll punch it in every single time. Before Nozel could retaliate, the grand doors burst open, and a guard stumbled in, panic evident on his face. Emergency. The capital. The capital is under attack. His voice echoed through the hall, and everyone whipped around, their expressions shifting from tension to shock. A member of the Golden Dawn quickly called forth his grimoire, his mana weaving through the air as he conjured a three-dimensional stone model of the noble realm over a nearby table. The intricately crafted landscape showed detailed images of the capital, with dark clouds of smoke rising from multiple points of attack. Klaus examined the magical projection, amazement coloring his face. Is this a real-time model of the noble realm? It's like he's coding the entire area in mana, letting us see and hear everything. Mimosa, equally in awe, nodded. It's far more advanced than my magic flower guidepost. The Golden Dawn caster pointed to 5 distinct areas on the map, each radiating with hostile mana signatures. For an enemy to infiltrate like this, a powerful spatial magic user must have transported them into position in an instant. As the others continued strategizing, Solid and Nabra helped Nozel back to his feet, their eyes shooting daggers at Stephen. But Asta was already moving, his face set with determination. What are we waiting for? People need help out there. We can't stand around. Klaus immediately retorted, shaking his head. Going where, Asta? We still don't fully understand the situation. And you can't even sense magic, remember? No, Asta has a point. Stephen said as he began floating, we're wasting our time here. Charmy, I'll leave Noel and Wanda for you to lead. I'll be going with Asta. Stephen said as he flew ahead. Both Stephen and Asta burst through the window into the balcony. Asta jumped onto the edge and leapt ahead into the open. Stephen flew overhead and gripped his extended hand midair and flew above the rising smoke and the destruction of the capital. As they disappeared, Wanda looked to Noel in confusion. Charmy? Wait, she's here. Charmy popped out from under the table, her cheeks full as she munched on a cupcake, looking around as if she'd just noticed the commotion. She swallowed, grinning. I was here the whole time. He must have sensed me. Impressive. Leopold let out a booming laugh, punching his fist into his open hand. Wahahaha. Rivals or not, I'm not letting them have all the fun. He charged after them, determination in his eyes. Fuego Leon took a deep breath, regaining control of the situation with a swift gesture. He began organizing the knights, his voice calm but authoritative as they prepared to defend the capital. As Stephen and Asta sped through the air toward the heart of the invasion, Stephen glanced down at Asta with a faint smirk. All right, I'm taking us straight to the source. Asta looked up at him, raising an eyebrow. Why don't you just teleport us? It'd be faster. Stephen rolled his eyes, but there was a hint of amusement. 2 reasons, genius, First, someone decided to charge off without giving me a chance to think about it, and second. He paused, shrugging. Because I didn't think of it until now. Before Asta could respond, Stephen let him go, conjuring a sling ring and opening a portal beneath the falling Asta. With a quick step, they both vanished into the portal and reappeared high above a narrow alleyway, descending just over the head of a sinister man with faint purple hair and a crystal-shaped eye patch. The man loomed over a little girl backed into the corner, her small body trembling with fear and tear-filled eyes. The man sneered down at her, voice low and mocking. "Hey, little girl, do you love the Clover Kingdom?" The girl whimpered, trying to hold back her tears. I love it," she stammered. "So please stop this." The man's expression darkened with a twisted grin. "Well, personally, I hate it." Before he could continue his torment, Asta's voice rang out as they plummeted toward him. "Then you're gonna hate this even more." Asta bellowed, sword aimed straight down at the man. But the man had already anticipated their arrival, spotting their shadows on the ground. He rolled out of the way with uncanny speed, narrowly dodging Asta's downward strike. Stephen landed beside Asta, quickly taking stock of the scene around them. The area was crawling with undead creatures, animated by dark magic and blocking any escape for the young girl. Arcane magic, bolts of Balthak. Stephen extended his hands as lightning-like bolts of arcane energy shot forth, zapping through the undead with powerful precision. Each bolt struck true, leaving the creatures slumping to the ground, lifeless once more. Seeing her chance, the little girl rushed out from her hiding spot and ran toward them, sobbing. "I was so scared," she cried, clinging to Stephen's cloak. Stephen knelt down, his face softening as he recognized her. "Wait a minute, aren't you Marie?" he asked, tilting his head in surprise. Marie looked up, confusion written across her tear-streaked face. "Hey? You know who I am?" Stephen nodded. "Yeah, we're in the same squad as your brother. He showed us a picture of you once." Asta's eyes widened as realization dawned on him. "That's right. You're Ghosh's little sister." "Wow, can't believe you remembered that," he said, glancing at Stephen in mild awe. Stephen just shrugged, his voice calm but protective. "Having a good memory is kind of my thing." The man with the eye patch glared at them, his face twisting in disgust as he took in the Black Bull's cloaks. "That sword, that emblem, you're those Black Bull brats, aren't you?" he sneered. Stephen's gaze hardened as he gently pushed Marie behind them, never breaking eye contact with the enemy. "Stay close to us, Marie. We'll protect you." Marie nodded, her small hands clutching onto the edge of his cloak as she moved behind them, away from the immediate danger. With a swift motion, Stephen clicked his wrists together, conjuring two tau mandalas that glowed brightly in his hands, casting an ethereal light over the narrow alley as he faced down their opponent. Asta raised his sword, the blade gleaming as they both braced for the battle ahead. Chapter 53, Strange Attack on the Capital, 2. Third Person's POV. Raids, the dark summoner of the undead, sneered as he surveyed Asta and Stephen with a twisted satisfaction. Stephen glanced at Asta, determination in his gaze. "Can I leave him to you? I'm going to set up a protective barrier and bring the civilians inside." Asta grinned fiercely, his voice brimming with confidence. "Is that even a question? Leave it all to me. You go do what needs to be done." Raid's eyes gleamed with malice as he raised his hands, calling forth an army of undead minions that began to encircle them. "Oh, I don't think so. Do you really believe you can escape? Get them. Don't let them escape." Stephen knelt down to lift Marie, a young girl clinging tightly to his neck, her eyes filled with worry. He offered her a reassuring smile. "Hold on tight, Marie," he said gently, before shooting into the sky, his cloak of levitation billowing around him. As they soared over the chaos below, Marie clutched his shoulders, her voice trembling. "What about your friend?" Stephen smirked confidently as they flew higher. "Asta? Don't worry about him. He might not look like much, but he's incredibly strong." The capital stretched out below them, a city in turmoil. Explosions rocked the streets, and black smoke curled into the air from multiple areas under siege. Stephen's heart pounded as he flew toward the central district. When he finally landed, he found himself facing the Silva siblings Solid, Nabra, and Nozel, who were in the middle of receiving praise for thwarting an attack. Solid and Nabra shot Stephen harsh looks, their expressions twisted with disdain. "This isn't the time to start trouble," Solid said, his voice cold. Stephen held up a hand, his tone unwavering. I know. I'm not here for that. We need to put our differences aside for now. There are people who need our help. Nozel studied Stephen's face, scrutinizing his resolve before finally giving a curt nod. Agreed. But don't think this means anything between us has changed. Stephen rolled his eyes, exasperated but focused. Fine. Besides, you still owe Noel an apology, but that can wait. I'm casting a powerful barrier now. Without waiting for a response, Stephen shot upward once more, stopping high above the district. He stretched out his hands, conjuring an intricate eldritch circle in front of him, rotating his hands to weave lines and interlocking geometric symbols inside it. As he finished, he raised the luminous circle above him, releasing it to cast a massive dome over the district. Arcane magic, Sanctuary of Ether. The dome shimmered to life, expanding from the circle and encompassing the entire central district in a protective, radiant sphere. Stephen descended slowly back toward Nozel and the others, who were now staring up at the dome in awe. Nozel nodded with grudging respect. How strong is it? Stephen met his gaze, a smirk tugging at his lips. It's the strongest defensive spell I have. I'll be teleporting civilians inside to keep them safe. You're free to leave, but no one else will be able to enter without my say. He hovered back into the air, creating a shimmering portal with his sling ring, which rippled around him. He shot forward, weaving through the sky above the noble district, his cloak streaming behind him. Each time he spotted civilians under attack by the undead, he would cast portals to transport them instantly into the sanctuary. Back inside the dome, civilians appeared in flashes of golden light. Some huddled on the ground, shielding themselves in fear, while others looked around in confusion at the sudden change of scenery. All of them soon realized they were safe, and whispers of gratitude began to ripple through the crowd. Nozel turned to his siblings, his expression resolute. He crafted a massive eagle of liquid mercury, its wings spreading wide as it awaited its riders. Leave the protection of the civilians to him. We're taking down the attackers. Solid and Nabra nodded, determination lighting their eyes. They climbed onto the Mercury Eagle, which took flight, passing out of the dome's barrier. Cheers erupted from the gathered civilians as they saw their protectors soaring into action. Wanda's hands pulsed with a red, crackling energy as she unleashed powerful bolts of magic at the advancing undead. Her crimson aura wrapped around her fingers, glowing like embers as she clenched her fist. With a swift motion, she tightened her grip, and the undead in her path crumbled to dust, the force of her magic collapsing their forms with a sickening crunch. In one fluid motion, Wanda raised her hands, and a massive piece of rubble from the ruined buildings around her floated into the air. She directed it forward with a flick of her wrist, slamming it down upon a group of undead, crushing them with a thunderous impact that shook the ground. Nearby, Noelle stood frozen, her face pale as several of the undead lunged toward her. Her body trembled, and she shrank back in fear, her mind blank in terror. Suddenly, a roaring wave of flames incinerated the creatures mid-leap, reducing them to ash before they could reach her. The heat from the fire was intense, and as she looked up, she saw Fuegoleon approaching, encased in a blazing aura, flames curling around him like a fiery cloak. Thank you, Noelle began, her voice wavering. Whack! Before she could finish, Fuegoleon delivered a firm karate chop to the top of her head, startling her. Focus! He barked, his voice a commanding roar. Ow! Noelle exclaimed, rubbing her head, eyes wide with surprise. Fuegoleon crossed his arms, his stern expression softened slightly by the steady glow of flames that danced around him. Black Bull's girl, are you really going to let the words of your siblings control you here? This is a battlefield. There's no time for fear or hesitation. One wrong decision could cost a life. His gaze was intense as he continued, his tone fierce but purposeful. You stand here as a member of the Magic Knights. If you chose this path of your own free will, then steel yourself and become stronger. He extended a finger towards her, his eyes unwavering. Being weak isn't something to be ashamed of. But staying weak is. Noelle's eyes widened at Fuegoleon's words. Fuegoleon's words struck her deeply, clearing away some of her self-doubt. He gave her a small smile, recognizing the change in her expression. And remember that boy Stephen, wasn't it? He believed in you. He was even willing to fight with a Magic Knight captain because he thought you weren't a failure. Are you going to prove him wrong by giving in? Her heart pounded as she replayed Stephen's words of encouragement in her mind. She looked down, Her hands clenched into fists as she bit her lip, steeling herself. He's right, Stephen always believed in me. He worked so hard to teach me, I won't let him down. With a deep breath, Noelle raised her hands and slapped her cheeks, her face turning red as she snapped herself out of her fear. Her eyes sharpened with newfound determination. Fuegoleon smirked, nodding approvingly. Now that's the look of a magic knight, he said, giving her a thumbs up. Noelle turned to face the oncoming horde of undead, her wand steady as she extended it forward. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on her mana. Her grimoire floated beside her, glowing with a brilliant blue light as her body became enveloped in shimmering mana. Water creation magic, Sea Dragon's Legion. Bright, flowing water began to materialize around Noelle, forming intricate, powerful shapes. A school of aquatic creatures, shimmering piranhas with gleaming, razor-sharp teeth, appeared from the magic surrounding her. She opened her eyes, and with a graceful but powerful motion, sent her spell surging forward. The piranhas shot through the air like a torrent, slicing through the ranks of the undead. They latched onto the limbs and torsos of each enemy they touched, glinting briefly before they exploded in bursts of water, tearing the undead apart with each aquatic blast. Fuegoleon watched in awe as the undead army was torn apart, their remains dissolving in a flood of water and light. His eyes widened, his jaw dropping in astonishment. You're supposed to be a failure? Little missy, your siblings must be blind. He said with a hearty laugh. Ha ha ha. Noelle blushed, rubbing the back of her head, a small, proud smile breaking through her usual nervous demeanor. Thank you, Stephen. Chapter 54, Strange Attack on the Capital, 3. Third Person's POV. Stephen's hands roared with flames, conjured from his flames of Fulton spell. The fires danced and crackled in shades of red and orange, illuminating his intense expression as he skated and glided effortlessly through the streets of the capital. With each thrust of his hands, Stephen incinerated the undead in his path, their bodies disintegrating into ash that drifted on the wind. As he advanced, Stephen concentrated, intensifying his spell. The flames shifted from a bright orange to an intense blue that mirrored the piercing glow of his eyes, which seemed to change hues with his magic's potency. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Ahead, Stephen spotted Mimosa and Klaus, who were bravely holding their ground, fending off a horde of undead. Though skilled, they were clearly surrounded, with little chance of escape. Stephen dropped to one knee, pressing his blazing blue hands into the cracked cobblestone. A deep rumble echoed through the street as he unleashed a torrent of fire, sending a pulse of raw, concentrated heat into the ground. The earth beneath them splintered, glowing with a radiant blue light as cracks snaked outward in all directions. From these fissures, massive pillars of flame erupted, towering as high as nearby buildings. The undead caught within the circle of fire were instantly vaporized, leaving only charred remnants in their wake. Mimosa and Klaus, temporarily disoriented by the sudden quake, regained their footing and turned to see Stephen emerging from the wall of flames, his eyes like molten sapphires and his fists still radiating a fiery blue glow. His very presence exuded an intimidating aura as he strode confidently toward them, trailing small arcs of fire. "You two all right?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. Klaus adjusted his glasses with a smirk. "Thanks for the assist, though we could have handled it." Mimosa offered a grateful smile. "Did you also send the civilians to safety?" Stephen nodded. "Yes. Actually, I was hoping you could go to them and help treat the injured." "Of course," Mimosa replied with a resolute expression. But before Stephen could open a portal for her, the ground beneath their feet turned pitch black. "Spatial magic," he warned, his tone sharp. In an instant, they were transported far beyond the kingdom's walls. Blinking as they regained their senses, they found themselves in a vast, open field with the members of several Magic Knight squads around them. Familiar faces from the Golden Dawn, Blue Rose, Silver Eagle and even Fuegoleon with Wanda and Noelle at his side filled the scene, all equally disoriented. Wanda and Noelle jogged over. "Thank goodness you're here!" Wanda exclaimed. Stephen raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't Charmy supposed to be with you?" Noelle chuckled awkwardly. She, smelled food while Fuegoleon was giving orders and ran off. Stephen sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Why am I not surprised?" Meanwhile, back in the capital, a sinister figure hovered over the dome that protected the civilians. The witch, clad in a black, fur-lined coat and an oversized, feathered hat, cackled as she watched the empty streets below. "All those magic knights fell for a trap like that?" How utterly foolish! She sneered, her laughter echoing eerily. Her gaze drifted to the dome shimmering with Stephen's protective spell. And look at that, those naive knights went to all the trouble of gathering up everyone here, just for me. Her eyes gleamed with malicious glee as she conjured a sphere of cursed ashes in her hand, its dark energy swirling ominously. But it seems I'll have to unwrap my little present first. The civilians within the dome cowered, but Stephen's spell proved more resilient than she anticipated. She then soon learned the true strength of the spell and what the ether part of its name means. As her cursed sphere touched the dome's geometric symbols, it dissolved harmlessly, its mana absorbed and used to strengthen the barrier, making it shimmer brightly. The dome takes any spell thrown at it and uses it to make itself stronger. The witch, known as Catherine, frowned, her glee shifting to irritation as the civilians inside cheered. Ha! We're safe thanks to the Black Bull Wizard. He said no one could break in here. We're saved as long as we remain inside. Before Catherine could mount another attack, she was blasted back by a powerful gust of wind. She spun wildly, clutching her broom to regain balance, and her narrowed gaze fell upon her assailant, floating gracefully, his jet black hair rippling in the breeze as he fixed her with a look of indifferent. Oh my! Talk about gorgeous! You're just my type! She purred, winking. How about ditching this place and having some fun with me? Yuno's face twisted in revulsion. Stay away from me and these people, you old hag! Her eyes lost their flirtatious glint, narrowing with fury. You're dead! She shrieked, her voice dripping with malice. Back in the field, Nozel turned to Stephen. Open a portal back to the noble district. Stephen scoffed. Don't order me around, you're not my captain. Fuegoleon raised a brow, asking politely, would you open a portal back to the capital? Sure thing, Stephen replied with a friendly smile, pulling out his sling ring and creating a swirling gateway. He glanced back at Nozel. See, that's how you ask someone for help. Maybe take some notes on basic courtesy. With a playful grin, he gave Nozel a friendly pat on the back. As Stephen stepped through the portal, he turned around, waved his hands in front of him while waggling his fingers mockingly. Maybe you can even learn of something we like to call modesty. Back in the capital, Noel shot him a nervous look. I can't tell if you're brave or just plain stupid, teasing my older brother like that. Just then, the portal widened as the Silva siblings took off, soaring into the air on a silver eagle spell, vanishing above. The portal closed with a soft hum behind them. Stephen sighed. No offense, Noel, but your family sucks. From beside him, Mimosa cleared her throat. You do realize I'm her cousin, right? She said with a small pout. Stephen froze, looking at her like a deer caught in headlights. Oh, I didn't mean you, Mimosa. You're amazing, you're great. I just meant well, her siblings, you know. Mimosa giggled at his flustered attempt to recover. There, not so bad, Noelle muttered under her breath. Stephen rolled his eyes. Not so bad? Who needs enemies with family like that? He teased, gently ruffling Noelle's hair. Hey! Quit messing with my hair! Noelle protested, swatting his hand away with a pout. Mimosa tugged at Stephen's sleeve. The civilians who need medical treatment, remember? Oh, right. Stephen conjured another portal, and Mimosa quickly jogged through to attend to the wounded. Stephen lifted off the ground, turning to the others. Asta's close by. Follow me. He called as he sped off. Wanda summoned orbs of red energy, floating after him, while Noelle groaned in frustration. I can't fly, remember? A little help would have been nice. She began to sprint after them, muttering under her breath, I'm a royal, yet I'm the only one without a way to fly. Chapter 55, Strange Attack on the Capital, 4. Third Person's POV. Yuno soared gracefully through the sky, his form cutting a striking figure against the heavens as he unleashed a flurry of glowing, green crescents. They sliced through the air with unnatural speed, each arc leaving a shimmering trail behind as it hurtled toward its target. Yet even with the furious velocity of Yuno's attacks, Catherine managed to evade him. She weaved skillfully on her broom, gripping tightly as she zigzagged through the barrage. Her laughter echoed, wild and taunting, as she conjured her own spells to hurl back at him. Crackling with manic energy, she seemed to revel in the chaos, her voice shrill and mocking. But Yuno cut down each of her attacks with precision and ease, his focus unbreakable. Suddenly, though, a strange blurriness crept into his vision, and his movements grew sluggish. Confusion flickered across his face as he tried to shake off the sensation, but his head felt heavy, clouded. Faintly, he heard Catherine's laughter, now muffled but dripping with cruel satisfaction. He he he. Why do you look so slow, so vulnerable? She mocked, licking her lips. Could it be that you didn't realize? Even after cutting down my cursed ash magic, its essence lingers in the air. You've been breathing it in, with every breath, it weakens you more and more. And that, she grinned wickedly, is the price you pay for calling me an old hag. Yuno exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. Remember what Stephen taught you: feel the wind as if it were your own skin. Use it as an extension of your senses. He centered himself, blocking out Catherine's mocking voice. Normally, this technique had felt challenging, his physical senses often too dominant. But now, as his body felt the weight of the curse, it came more naturally. As he delved deeper into his magic, his awareness heightened. The world around him became a symphony of mana, each thread vibrant and alive. His eyes snapped open, glowing in intense green, as his grimoire began to hum and its pages flipped open of their own accord. Powerful pillars of wind rose around him, swirling in intense currents that left Catherine wide-eyed in shock. The winds parted, revealing Yuno, standing with an air of unshakable resolve. Before him, a small, ethereal figure emerged, a wind fairy, Sylph, with arms outstretched protectively. Though his vision was still impaired, a faint smirk graced Yuno's face. Dash! Meanwhile, Stephen cut through the sky, arriving at a battlefield littered with corpses, a grim testament to the fierce struggle that had unfolded. Leopold was locked in battle, standing near Asta, who was fighting against a hulking puppet corpse called Number 3, David. The puppet loomed over him, thick and formidable, wielding muddy water magic, a direct counter to Leopold's fiery arsenal. Asta, in turn, faced off against two unique corpses that emanated a sinister presence. The first, Number 4, Jimmy, was a towering figure with elongated arms wrapped in black bandages. Sinister, purple curse orbs orbited around him, pulsing with dark energy. The second, Number 2, Alfred, floated ominously, his body bound in a black straitjacket, his eyeless face adorned with eerie, eye-shaped ornaments. Lightning crackled and surged around him, giving him an aura of impending doom. Come on, Asta. I thought you'd have this wrapped up by now. Stephen called out with a smirk as he hovered overhead. It's not that easy. Asta shouted, struggling to fend off attacks from both enemies. Dual swords in hand, his demonic markings flared across his face. If I focus on one, the other gets an opening. He dashed to and fro, skillfully blocking lightning bolts and deflecting curse orbs, his movements a blur of pure determination. Instead of just standing there, how about lending a hand? Asta yelled. Whom should I? Stephen mused, his tone playful. Stephen. Asta barked in frustration. All right, Stephen chuckled, raising his hand. Let's make this a little easier. Nearby, Raids issued cold commands to his puppets. Jimmy, keep the pressure on the anti-magic brat. Alfred, go after the floating maggot before he decides to go away again. Cripple them both. Stephen grinned, observing the situation. With a commanding voice, he called out, I summon the crimson bands of Sidorak. Scarlet bands of energy erupted from his arms, wrapping around his limbs in a brilliant, crimson glow. Alfred lunged at him, unleashing a surge of electricity in Stephen's direction. Calmly, Stephen extended his palm, absorbing the discharge as steam hissed from his hand. When the attack ceased, he clenched his fist, a faint smile playing on his lips. My turn, he declared, darting forward with astonishing speed. He closed the gap to Alfred in an instant, delivering a punch that sent the corpse flying back, then following up with another blow, his expression gleeful. Meanwhile, Leopold was under heavy assault from David's muddy water magic, thick tendrils of murky liquid lashing toward him. Suddenly, a figure descended from above, landing in a crouch. Wanda, her gaze focused and fierce, raised her hands, her eyes glowing with a crimson hue. She unleashed a wave of magic that surged outward, capturing the undead including David in a crimson glow. With a twist of her fingers, she levitated them, suspending them in midair before swinging her arms down, slamming down to the ground with a large thud. Seeing this, Raids hissed and retaliated with a projectile of his magic aimed at Wanda. But before it could strike, a protective dome of water encased her, courtesy of Noelle, who was panting from exertion. She steadied herself, one hand on her knee, wand pointed protectively at Wanda. With a determined expression, Wanda clasped her hands together, the strain evident on her face as she poured her energy into the spell. The undead began to crack, splintering like fragile glass. With a final, forceful gesture, she slammed her hands down, shattering the corpses in a burst of crimson light. Leopold let out an impressed whistle. Whoa! You black bulls are something else. Wanda managed a slight smile, brushing back her hair as she glanced at the others. Asta was in the midst of his own intense fight, swinging his swords with relentless fury, his movements blurring as he sliced through curse orbs faster than Jimmy could summon them. With a triumphant shout, he cleaved through the puppet, bisecting it with a powerful slash. As Asta finished his battle, a body crashed at Raids' feet. It was Alfred, now headless, his mangled form twisted beyond recognition. Stephen floated down, tossing Alfred's severed head up and down casually. Really, Asta, I don't see why you struggled. He was pretty weak. He grinned, squeezing the head until it shattered in his hand. Raids' face twisted in fury, his mana spiking as he prepared to unleash his wrath at seeing his prized creations destroyed. Chapter 56, Strange Attacks on the Capital, 5. Third Person's POV. Fuegoleon approached the chaotic scene, a calm yet imposing presence against the swirling tension. It seems you kids are having quite a bit of fun, he remarked, casting an approving glance over everyone cornering Raids. I watched you all fight just now. I hate to admit it, but it seems Yami has better foresight than I do when it comes to picking squad members. His gaze lingered on Asta, a smirk forming on his face. Asta, wasn't it? You said you were going to become the Wizard King. A loud, mocking laugh echoed as Raids sneered. Ha ha ha. Say what? This runt, the Wizard King. As if a nobody like him could ever reach that height. Ha. Fuegoleon ignored the taunt, keeping his smirk focused on Asta. Then, in that case, you and I are rivals as well. Stephen stood nearby, eyebrows raised in amusement as he overheard. I get that becoming the Wizard King is a huge honor, but what's with everyone's obsession? Well, I can't say much with me wanting to be the Sorcerer Supreme, he thought, chuckling quietly to himself. Meanwhile, Raid's expression shifted, the grin slipping as he fully registered Fuegoleon's presence. Wait, that's Fuegoleon Vermilion, he thought, a shiver running down his spine. Deciding to make a desperate stand, he summoned another corpse with a wave of his hand, a tall, thin figure covered in bandages and dressed in white clerical robes decorated with diamond-shaped ornaments. A bizarre eye-shaped object adorned its face. The undead figure, known as Carl, floated ominously beside Raids, who surrounded himself with a shimmering sphere of magic. Fuegoleon's gaze turned fiery, his voice unwavering as he declared, "Leave him to me." In an instant, flames erupted from his body, fierce and relentless. Stephen covered his mouth to stifle a laugh as he noticed Asta's wide, gleeful grin. A faint blush appeared on Asta's cheeks as he muttered, "A magic knight captain just called me his rival. Rah! Let's do this!" Asta shouted, lunging forward, gripping both swords tightly. Stephen shook his head with a smirk, raising his hands skyward. With a flash, his weapon, Dragon Fang, materialized and dropped into his hand like a bolt of lightning. He hoisted it over his shoulder, ready for battle. Raids sneered, looking around at the determined faces surrounding him. Am I really so feared that you need so many people against me? I must say, I'm loving the attention. Stephen tilted his head, replying with mock innocence, why? Did your mother never give you any? The remark hung in the air, thick with tension, as everyone turned slowly to stare at Stephen, even Raids visibly twitching. Stephen merely shrugged, covering his mouth with his hand. Sorry, that honestly just slipped out. I didn't even mean to say it. Fuegoleon returned his focus to Raids, his tone cold and demanding. What is it that you people want? Your actions are too scattered for an invasion, yet too organized for mere chaos. Who are you? With a twisted smile, Raids responded, 6 years ago, I was the top choice for a Magic Knight squad. The name's Raids. Fuegoleon's eyes widened slightly in surprise. You were once a Magic Knight? Of course, you don't remember, Raids snarled. I was never important enough for people like you to care about. Fuegoleon's expression softened briefly. I do remember you were in the Purple Orcus, weren't you? With such talent, why would you? I was expelled. Raid's voice cracked with rage, his face contorted with bitterness. They said my wraith magic was dangerous, forbidden. Since I was a commoner, nobody stood up for me. They exiled me from both the squad and the country. Even though my talents were better than anyone's, better than the nobles. Wasn't magic supposed to be everything, hey? So that's why. I'm here to avenge myself against those magic knights and the country. That's why I'm doing this. Stephen exchanged an amused glance with Wanda, who had appeared beside him. She leaned in, whispering, "Why are we even listening to this? Wouldn't it be better to capture him and then interrogate him?" "Your guess is as good as mine," Stephen replied in a low voice. "It's probably the novelty of it, so we're just letting it play out. For a childish reason like that." Fuegoleon growled, his patience wearing thin. "Don't toy with me. I'm no fool." Fuegoleon's grimoire began to glow, and with a fierce incantation, he unleashed a powerful spell. Flame creation magic, La Urzina. A massive lion's head, ablaze with fiery magic, appeared above him, radiating an intense heat that forced everyone to step back. "A little warning would have been appreciated," Stephen muttered as he adjusted his cloak. "I apologize, I can't really control the intensity of this flame," Fuegoleon said with narrowed eyes as he offered a quick apology to everyone. The lion's mouth opened, and with a deafening roar, it released a torrent of flames that engulfed Raids, Carl and the magical barrier protecting them. Fire crackled and roared, consuming everything in its path. However, Raids only laughed louder. "Ha! Number 1, Carl. When he was alive, he was a defensive expert. I've enhanced his defenses with my curse magic, he's even tougher now." Stephen glanced over at Asta and nodded. "Asta, cut through that shield, and then Fuegoleon can hit him with another blast of fire. In the meantime, Stephen turned his attention to a pile of corpses nearby, raising his hand as a surge of magical energy crackled through his fingers. Arcane magic, bolts of Balthak. Blue lightning danced across his hand before firing in zigzagging streaks toward the corpse pile. But before the bolts could reach their target, one of the undead leapt up, intercepting them. He spread his arms, conjuring black portals that redirected the bolts in various directions, causing them to collide in midair. "And here I was hoping to catch you off guard," Stephen said with a smirk, his eyes narrowing. The undead figure chuckled, his voice low and taunting. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." Slowly, he reached up, pulling off a mask to reveal his true face, a pale, lean man with wavy grey hair and a cold gaze. "Valtos!" Raids exclaimed in surprise. Stephen rolled his eyes at the reveal. "You should have kept the mask on, you looked much better with it." Valtos sneered, creating another dark portal and stepping through it. He reappeared on a rooftop, gazing down at everyone with a look of disdain. "You're a funny one, aren't you?" he remarked, his voice dripping with contempt. Stephen shrugged, an easy smirk playing across his face. "I have my moments," he replied, gripping his swords with a glint of challenge in his eyes as he prepared to face this new threat. Chapter 57, Strange Attacks on the Capital, 6. Third Person's POV. Stephen secured his sword at his waist, held firmly in place by an enchanted sash. Taking a deep breath, he hovered off the ground, eyes narrowing in focus as golden, glowing tau mandalas formed around his hands. Without hesitation, Stephen surged forward, propelling himself through the air toward Valtos, his gaze sharpened with intent as he prepared to gauge the power of his opponent's spatial magic. Valtos, observing Stephen's rapid approach, spread his arms wide with a sinister smile. Shadows rippled and coalesced into several dark portals, hovering ominously in the air around him. A moment later, an onslaught of dark magic bullets erupted from each portal, hurtling toward Stephen from every angle, their eerie glow painting the battlefield in shades of violet and black. Stephen's hands moved with practiced precision, each motion fluid and deliberate. He twirled and weaved, the tau mandalas on his palms deflecting the incoming barrage with bursts of bright light. Explosions crackled around him as the bullets made contact with his mystical shields, their force dissipated by his swift and graceful maneuvers. As he twisted in the air, Stephen narrowed his focus, channeling his magic to morph the mandalas into elegant war fans that shimmered with ethereal power. For a heartbeat, the assault paused as Stephen stopped most of them with the war fan. Stephen seized the moment. He flashed through a series of intricate hand signs while muttering an incantation under his breath. Instantly, blue flames, the flames of Fulton, ignited around his hands, their heat intense and otherworldly. With a deft spin, Stephen transformed into a whirling cyclone of flame, burning through any dark magic projectiles that dared approach him. The searing vortex of blue fire rippled towards him as he curled into a ball, channeling the flames into a condensed sphere before unfurling his body with explosive energy. The resultant shockwave of flame swept across the battlefield, incinerating the dark bullets and collapsing the small, pulsing portals in its wake. Voltos's eyes widened in disbelief as his dark gateways fizzled out, consumed by the searing heat. "Impossible," he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a hiss as the battlefield crackled with residual energy. Stephen, surrounded by the flickering remnants of flame that danced across his robes and singed the ends of his hair and body, allowed a confident grin to spread across his face. "Don't you just love magic?" "I know I do," he said, his voice steady, eyes gleaming with determination as he clenched his fists tighter. With a sudden thrust, Stephen launched a powerful torrent of blue flames directly at Voltos. The dark wizard's form shimmered as he sank into the shadows beneath his feet, vanishing just before the inferno seared through where he had stood. The rooftop buckled under the intense heat, the spot where Voltos had been now scorched and half melted. Reappearing on a distant section of the rooftop, Voltos smirked, though his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. Stephen clicked his tongue in mild frustration. "This is going to get annoying fast," he muttered, extinguishing the flames on one hand which he used to summon his sling ring. With practiced ease, Stephen traced a circle in the air, a swirling portal of light materializing before him. Without hesitation, he flew through it. Suddenly, multiple portals of both black and gold began to manifest across the city of the Clover Kingdom. From within those portals, Stephen conjured orbs of blue fire, launching them at Voltos with precision. Seeing Stephen fly ahead, Wanda summoned 2 glowing orbs of magic to her palms, using them to levitate. "I'll see if Stephen needs help," she informed Noel before darting after him. Meanwhile, Asta and Fuegoleon stood ready to face raids. The barrier protecting raids shimmered as projectiles ricocheted off it and hurtled toward the group. Fuegoleon prepared to unleash his flames, and Asta readied his sword, but much to their surprise Noel moved faster. Water creation magic, Sea Dragon's Lair. A massive dome of water engulfed them, forming a protective shield that deflected the incoming projectiles. Fuegoleon glanced back at Noel, a smile touching his lips. "While your defense is appreciated, it's unnecessary." "He's right," Asta shouted with enthusiasm. He charged out of the dome, swords in hand, becoming a blur as he leapt off the wall and plunged both blades into Raid's barrier, shattering it like glass. Raid's confident smirk twisted into a look of panic as Fuegoleon stepped out from behind the watery shield, steam rising from his figure as his grimoire glowed brilliantly. A small orb of flames appeared before Fuegoleon, releasing a straight beam of searing heat that struck Carl square in the chest, leaving a tiny hole that ignited moments later. Raid's eyes widened in disbelief. "Flame creation magic, Soul Linea." At that instant, a black portal appeared near the wall, and Voltos tumbled out, his robe scorched and torn. Yet, before anyone could react, Voltos raised his hand, conjuring a portal beneath Fuegoleon's feet that swallowed him in an instant. "Big brother!" Leopold shouted, his voice ringing with alarm. At the same time, a golden portal shimmered, and Stephen stepped through it. "Sir Fuegoleon!" Asta gasped, eyes wide with shock. Raids threw his head back and cackled maniacally. "Ha ha 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 ha! That fool! My vengeance was only a side quest, he was the real target." "What did you do?" Stephen demanded, his expression growing serious, as Wanda quickly appeared as well upon hearing the shouting. Leopold went and took a hold of Voltos. "You freak! Where the hell did you send my brother? Tell me!" Leopold yelled as he grabbed Voltos' shirt tightly. Everyone then got distracted by Raids laughing once again, which gave Voltos the perfect opportunity to conjure a portal behind him and appear on a roof overlooking them. "You want your precious brother back? Here you can have him," Voltos said as a portal appeared above the ground. And out came Fuegoleon with a missing arm, blood splattering and pooling all over the stone ground. "Fuegoleon!" Leopold shouted in grief. "Ah!" Asta yelled in fury as he stared at the 2 beings responsible. Stephen didn't hesitate and immediately stepped forwards. He flipped Fuegoleon around and hit the area around his lost limb rapidly. "What are you doing?" Leopold asked, tears appearing around his eyes. "Acupuncture for now, I'm stopping the bleeding before I start conjuring a healing spell," Stephen said as he made a hand movement over Fuegoleon's limb. "Arcane magic, Terranati healing spell." Light green energy escaped from Stephen's hands and started enveloping Fuegoleon's figure. "We've done what we came to do, Raids," so let's leave before any more magic knights show up, Valtos told Raids while holding his side. Asta, don't let them escape. Stephen ordered as he focused on healing Fuegoleon. Stephen increased the power of his spell, adding even more mana and magic power to it. The strength of his spell increased that a large magical aura exploded off from him, sending out a small shock wave as he concentrated. Slowly Fuegoleon's wounds began to close as the blood around his body began to dry up. I'm going to need more time, this might take a while, his wounds are more severe than we expected and appear, Stephen muttered. Chapter 58, Strange Attacks on the Capital, 7. Third Person's POV. We've done what we came to do. Let's get out of here, Raids, before any more magic knights show up, Valtos said, extending his hand as a dark, swirling portal opened beneath Raids. Oh, no, you don't. Asta's voice roared across the battlefield. Without hesitation, he hurled his heavy sword toward the portal. The blade crashed down onto the dark circle, breaking Valtos's spell with the power of his anti-magic, sending a shockwave through the ground. Valtos and Raids, frozen in disbelief, stared at the young knight, realizing they were trapped. Raids blinked, taking a wary step back, but it was already too late. Asta was upon him. With a fierce swing, Asta's sword sliced through Raid's chest, leaving a jagged gash from which blood seeped freely. Raid stumbled back, clutching his chest in agony. Yaik! Ow! He screamed, his voice tinged with pain and anger. What do you think you're doing, you trash? This is not good, Valtos muttered under his breath, eyes darting frantically as he prepared another spell. But Asta was relentless, his thrown sword now back in his grip, he drove it down, stabbing at the magical energy forming beneath Raid's feet once again. Asta's voice roared above the chaos, raw and filled with righteous fury. After all the innocent people you've hurt, you think you can escape this? You take pleasure in causing pain, but now you'll feel it yourself. With a swift, brutal motion, Asta grabbed Raids by the collar, dragging him up and slamming his forehead into Raid's nose. The impact was brutal, the sickening crunch of bone shattering echoed as blood sprayed, teeth breaking in the collision. Stop it! Raid sputtered, spitting blood to the side, rage burning in his eyes. Getting hurt just means you're weak. Those with weak magic should just lie down and let those with power do what they want. His eyes blazed with twisted fervor. Especially trash like you with no magic. Asta's grip tightened, readying for another strike, but Raids shouted frantically over his shoulder, Valtos! Do something already! I would if I could, Valtos muttered, growing increasingly alarmed. Anti-magic is more of a nuisance than I thought. He attempted to summon a portal behind Asta for a surprise attack. Valtos glared, sweat beading on his brow as he conjured a portal behind Asta, seeking any advantage. But before he could act, a figure appeared silently behind him. Wanda's crimson-cloaked hands hovered at his temples, her eyes glowing a fierce scarlet. Stephen said I can make people confront their deepest fears, she whispered, her voice soft yet deadly. Let's see what haunts you. Valtos' expression shifted from defiance to terror as her magic took hold. His eyes, wide and reddening with unseen horrors, filled with tears. A shudder racked his frame as he crumpled to his knees, sobs escaping from his throat. Wow, Wanda remarked, a hint of pride tugging at her lips. I must be better at this than I thought. Valtos, what the hell are you doing? Raids yelled, panic creeping into his voice as he looked back at his partner in horror. Meanwhile, Leopold knelt beside Stephen, his lip trembling as he watched his older brother, Fuegoleon, lying unconscious. Stephen was surrounded by a soft green aura as he used his healing magic, his brows knit in concentration. How is he? How is my brother? Leopold choked, desperation in his voice. Stephen's eyes softened, though his hands remained steady. I'm doing all I can. His injuries go beyond the physical, but I'm helping his body recover, regrowing his arm. It's going to take a while. Recreating what was lost takes time and mana. Leopold's gaze shifted to where the green glow knitted new flesh, transforming a stump into the bare beginnings of an arm. Thank you for saving him. But before Stephen could respond, a sudden gust of wind surrounded them, forming a cyclone-like barrier. Emerging from the swirling winds were several mages in white robes, their faces obscured by hoods. Master's orders were clear, one mage said with a sneer. But against these weaklings? What a disappointment! He laughed, a sound like glass shards grating against each other. Ah ha ha ha! The tables have turned now! Raids shouted with glee. Asta stepped forward, his grip firm on both swords, positioning himself in the center of the group. Don't think that surrounding us means you've won. I'll show you all I have what it takes to be Wizard King. Bring it on. The robed mages raised their hands in unison, orbs of condensed magic flaring into existence and swelling with destructive power. They unleashed a volley of spells toward Asta, but he met them head-on, spinning and slashing with precision, each strike cutting down their magic with the power of his anti-magic blade. One mage, however, was eyeing someone else. Wanda. With a sneer, he cast a spell. Wind creation magic, tornado needles. Sharp, spiraling winds shot forth, each needle-like gust whizzing past Asta and straight for Wanda. Sensing the danger, Wanda's eyes glowed scarlet as she instinctively cast a probability hex around herself, causing the attacks to veer off course. But one needle slipped through, grazing her shoulder. She winced, clutching the wound as blood began to seep through her fingers, momentarily breaking her spell over Voltos. Freed from his nightmarish torment, Voltos shook his head, took in the scene, and quickly conjured two portals beneath himself and raids, whisking them beside their fellow mages. The intruders rallied, preparing to strike again. Seeing their numbers grow, Leopold stepped forward, his eyes fierce. I'll protect them. You just focus on healing my brother, he told Stephen. Without waiting for a response, Leopold unleashed a wave of fire in the form of fireballs, his voice ringing with determination. Don't think about coming any closer. Flame magic, exploding flames. The searing orbs detonated among the mages, forcing them back. I'm not weak enough to need protection, Stephen scoffed. He held out his hand sign towards Fuegelian's wounds and concentrated as he activated another spell simultaneously. He had to be extra careful to not make the two spells clash with one another. If they want to play with numbers, let's teach them some true multiplication, Stephen grinned. Arcane magic, image of icon. From behind Stephen, a legion of identical images rose, filling the skies and streets with countless versions of himself. Each clone stood poised, hands raised, forming blazing Tau mandalas. Their voices echoed in unison, a thunderous chorus. You have no idea with whom you are messing with. Let me enlighten you, I am Dr. Stephen Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, future Sorcerer Supreme. And you people aren't welcome in this kingdom that I have chosen to protect. Stephen's voice echoed 10,000 times as they all spoke simultaneously. Plus 31 advanced chapters on patreon.com/shadow_d_monarch3. Comment. 13 comment. Vote. 1 left. Chapter 59, Chapter 59, Strange Attacks on the Capital, End. Third person's POV. Do you think those are real? One of the robed mages asked as they cautiously turned their heads, eyeing all the versions of Stephen Strange with a wary glance. I can't tell. They don't look or feel like illusions. I can sense their magical power and presence. But I still can't be sure. If it is an illusion, it's a powerful one capable of deceiving even our senses. All the Stephens thrust their hands forward, weaving them into a singular hand sign. From their Tau mandalas, eldritch whips shot forth, imprisoning the mages in cocoons. Some screamed as a burning sensation spread where the whips made contact. We need to get out of here. Defensive maneuvers. One of them ordered, igniting their magical power. At that moment, the other magic knight captains began appearing, surprised to see so many Stephens in their surroundings as they descended from the rooftops. The robed mage who had activated her magic, though tied up, gripped her wand tightly and cast her spell. Gel magic, sticky salamander. A giant purple salamander made of gel materialized and grew to towering heights. As it appeared, it opened its mouth and unleashed a purple acid that burned through the eldritch whips, causing them to snap and fall, freeing the mages. Meanwhile, the magic knight captain stared at Fuegelian's condition in shock before springing into action. Nozel's expression turned cold as his grimoire flared to life, and he activated his spell. Mercury magic, rain of silver. Small droplets of liquid metal floated in the sky before raining down on the giant salamander. Some of Stephen's clones were caught in the downpour as they moved. Oi, watch it! One of them shouted, trying to dodge the rain. Some exaggerated their reactions, crying out in pain as they began to melt, revealing skeletal structures, a sight that horrified those watching. The mage with the wand used a magic item to enhance the salamander's abilities. Dark magic item, special properties and alpha absorb. The salamander absorbed the liquid mercury, neutralizing Nozel's attack. Remember this, magic knights, one of the robed mages said ominously. We are the Eye of the Midnight Sun, the ones who will destroy the Clover Kingdom. Not if I have anything to say about it. Asta shouted, charging forward, the ground cracking as he propelled himself with raw strength. The salamander struck out a limb to block Asta, but Voltos conjured a black portal beneath them, whisking them away. Asta cut through the limb, but it was too late, the Eye of the Midnight Sun had vanished. Damn it! Asta yelled in frustration. The Eye of the Midnight Sun reappeared in a forest, surrounded by trees. Some examined their arms, noticing the burn marks slowly fading. So, it was an illusion after all. A dangerous one. It felt so real I could swear my skin was burning. Talk about unsettling. I want to dissect him. He's strange. Strange is good, one of them said, an ominous smile spreading across their face. Even though it was an illusion, the slight burns remained. The group began making their way to their hideout, some with solemn expressions, others indifferent. As they entered, a voice greeted them. Why, hello there. I'm not intruding, am I? They spun around to see Julius Novacrono, the Wizard King, standing with a bright, cheerful smile. Nozel regarded Stephen with a neutral expression. You can drop your dreadful illusion. My Rain of Silver spell doesn't have a melting effect, it's more of a piercing type. Stephen shrugged. It was a 50-50 chance. I had to make it convincing so they wouldn't suspect it was an illusion. You all took your sweet time getting here, didn't you? Leopold said with a hint of irritation. Solid scoffed, chuckling. Pathetic. He's supposed to be your captain, yet he ended up like this? The Vermilion clan isn't what it used to be. I'm honestly embarrassed to be a noble. Solid. Noelle yelled as she gave him a chastising look, how can you say something like that? Solid flinched slightly at Noelle yelling at him, the look Noelle had and the way she reprimanded him, all he saw was the face of his mother looking back at him like that, which only made him angrier. Just as he was about to give her a piece of his mind, Stephen looked back towards him with a cold expression, damn right you should be embarrassed to be a noble, as you'll never be the kind of noble Fuegoleon ever was. I too would be ashamed if I were you, Stephen scoffed. You. Solid screeched. That's enough, Nozel commanded, silencing Solid with a stern look. We have more pressing matters. We need to fortify our defenses and ensure the capital is safe from any hidden threats or enemies. Stephen stood in a room in front of a bed. On that bed lay Fuegoleon, whose arm was slowly being restored. Mimosa stood by his side, wearing her green flower robe spell as she assisted Stephen. With a focused expression, Mimosa said, I still don't understand. How are you making his body regenerate his missing limb? Regeneration is incredibly advanced for healing magic. That's because you're thinking you're the one regenerating the arm for him. But you're not. He's regenerating it himself, we're just providing the energy he needs to do so, Stephen explained. That's also why this process is slow. If the body uses too much energy to heal one limb, the rest of it could shut down. Normally, before the body could accumulate enough energy to heal, the cells around the wound would have already died and sealed, making regeneration impossible. I see the more time I spend with you, the more I realize how smart you truly are. I've learned so much from you in such a short time. Your knowledge amazes me, Mimosa said, focusing on Fuegoleon's arm with a look of genuine respect and admiration. Okay, now you're exaggerating, Stephen scoffed with a small smile. Mimosa giggled. No, I'm being honest. Before becoming an official magic knight, I studied in a neighboring kingdom to prepare myself. While I learned a lot about mana and spell casting, I didn't gain much knowledge in the medical field. I'm not saying I didn't learn anything, but their expertise wasn't as advanced as yours. Come on, now you're just trying to make me blush, Stephen muttered, feeling warmth rise to his cheeks. Mimosa chuckled, her own cheeks turning red with embarrassment. After some time, the green light reached Fuegoleon's fingertips, and his nails fully reformed. When Mimosa finished, she stepped back, swaying slightly before Stephen quickly grabbed her waist. Whoa there! Mimosa blinked as she and Stephen locked eyes. She reached out and touched his cheek before retracting her hand, blushing as she stood upright again. She offered a weak smile. Sorry, healing all those civilians and now this. I've used up more mana than I realized. No worries, I understand. Still, you did great. Let's report back, Stephen said, clearing his throat as they both walked toward the Wizard King and the rest of the Magic Knights waiting outside. Julius looked at Stephen apprehensively. So, how is he? He's all right now. He's in a minor coma, but he's out of danger. He should wake up in 2 to 3 weeks, as good as new, Stephen reported. Everyone sighed in relief. Thank you, Stephen, Julius said seriously. Truly, you've done the kingdom a huge favor. I mean no disrespect to my men, but if it were anyone else, they might not have done as great a job as you did. Now I wonder how much I should charge you. You are the king, after all, so you'd be willing to pay a hefty bill, Stephen said with a smirk. Everyone exclaimed, looking at Stephen in surprise. Sure, Julius nodded with a serious expression. Stephen rolled his eyes. I'm joking. No need to be so serious. I became a doctor because I enjoy helping people. Besides, as a magic knight, I'm just doing my duty to the kingdom. And I didn't do this alone, Stephen said, giving Mimosa a wink, which made her smile bashfully. Leopold stepped forward and bowed. Thank you. Because of you, my brother will be okay, and you even helped restore his arm. The Crimson Lions will forever be in your debt. I see now why doctors in my world would get big heads if they were constantly praised like this, Stephen thought. Stephen then looked at Julius with a serious expression. Actually, may I ask for a small favor? As long as it's reasonable, Julius replied. Stephen pointed to Nozel. Make him apologize to Noelle for what he said about her. Noelle muttered, looking at Stephen in surprise. Leopold burst out laughing, holding his stomach. Wow! I didn't think you'd go that far. My rival is more ruthless than I expected. Nozel's eyes twitched as he glared at Stephen. Julius blinked, looking amused. That's it. Yes, Stephen nodded. He hasn't apologized. I won't allow any disrespect toward the people I care about. Mimosa looked at Stephen with growing admiration, while Noelle frantically waved her hands in front of her face, eyes wide with nerves. There's no need for that. He doesn't need to apologize. Stephen looked at her seriously. You need to realize that you can't let people disrespect you. If you do, they'll think it's okay to continue. Julius chuckled, then looked at Nozel. Well. Nozel stared at Julius in disbelief. Are you serious? I said I'd grant him the favor if it was reasonable, and it is, Julius said with a grin. Now, go on. Make up with your little sister. Nozel glared at Stephen, who wore a smug expression. He turned to Noelle, who stood trembling, unable to meet his eyes. I'm going to kill him. Both siblings thought simultaneously. I'm sorry, Nozel muttered. What was that? That was supposed to be an apology? I could barely hear it. Do you need more protein, or should I make you a diet plan? Stephen teased, placing a hand on his hip and cupping his ear. Now, with more energy, and mean it this time. Nozel's patience snapped, and he summoned his grimoire. I'm going to kill you. Noelle quickly stepped forward, giving Nozel a gentle smile. There's no need to apologize again. I accept your first apology. I know how prideful you are, and that must have been hard. Thank you. Stephen sighed, respecting Noelle's wishes and dropping the matter. Nozel glanced at Noelle and saw their mother's face reflected in her features. He closed his eyes and sighed. Just work hard not to embarrass the Silva name, he said before turning away to join Solid and Nabra, who stared in shock. Noelle looked astonished by his words and bowed deeply. I'll do my best not to disappoint, she said, hiding the tears welling in her eyes. Chapter 60, Strange Promotion. Third Person's POV. Julius stood before the assembled magic knights, a warm, knowing smile gracing his face. The hall, draped in regal banners and adorned with insignias representing the various squads. As you are all aware, he began, his voice steady and authoritative, today is still the annual War Merits confirmation ceremony. Given the events that have just transpired, I believe that certain promotions are well deserved, in recognition of the outstanding achievements of our fellow magic knights. A murmur of curiosity swept through the room. They were back in the very hall where the day had begun for them before the attack. Julius, standing tall on the podium, began reading out the names and reciting accomplishments that had earned these young warriors their due recognition. After a while he got towards the Black Bulls. First, we have Asta from Hage Village, Julius announced, his gaze sweeping over the crowd until it landed on the young knight whose smile was growing by the second upon having his name called. For his role in conquering a dungeon and minimizing casualties, while also facing the eye of the midnight sun head-on, Asta has accumulated enough stars to be promoted to third-class Magic Knight. Asta's chest puffed out with pride, a playful grin spreading across his face as he rubbed the side of his nose with a finger. The hall filled with a mix of applause and chatter. Stephen, standing nearby, clapped him firmly on the back in congratulations. Asta's cheeks flushed slightly as he laughed, a rare moment of bashful humility. And next, Julius continued, a twinkle in his eye, we have Charmy Papitson. Thanks to her unexpected yet pivotal capture of one of the perpetrators from the recent attack, she is hereby promoted to first-class junior knight. A chorus of shocked exclamations rose from Stephen, Noel, Asta, and Wanda, who turned to gape at Charmy. She stood with her arms crossed, chin held high and eyes gleaming with mischief. When did you manage to catch one of them? Noel demanded, eyes wide with disbelief. Yet, was it that time when you wandered off to eat? Wanda chimed in, raising an eyebrow skeptically. Charmy smirked and tilted her head arrogantly. Show some respect, you insolent bunch. You're speaking to your senior now. Rolling their eyes at her dramatic tone, the others waited as Charmy's expression softened. To answer your question, she said, a touch more sincerely, that hottie over there. She pointed a dainty finger at Yuno, who stood stoically tossed the culprit my way during his fight. And she had the audacity to try stealing my food. So, of course, I had to teach her a lesson. Nearly lost my precious meal, but then he appeared. Her eyes turned dreamy, voice trailing off. Like a knight on a white stallion, saving my dish from disaster. Julius let the mirth settle before continuing. Finally, we have Stephen Strange, Julius said, and a ripple of whispers coursed through the crowd. Not only did he capture a member of the Midnight Sun on his very first mission, but he also aided in the conquest of a dungeon, proved himself as an exceptional healer during his examination, organized civilians during the recent attack and kept them secure from danger, contributed to repelling the eye of the Midnight Sun from our kingdom, and managed to save and heal a Magic Knight captain. For these acts of valor, Stephen Strange is hereby promoted to 5th class Intermediate Magic Knight. The hall fell into stunned silence for a moment as everyone processed the news. Stephen blinked, momentarily taken aback before turning to Charmy with a smirk. Who's the senior now? He teased. Charmy's eyes widened before she bowed repeatedly, flailing her arms with exaggerated fervor. You are, Senior Strange. Stephen grinned smugly. And don't you forget it. The ceremony wrapped up with Julius stepping forward to address the gathered Magic Knights one last time. The crowd began to disperse, as Julius then went off and made an announcement which rang through the capital to put the people's mind at rest. Stephen joined the Black Bulls as they made their way to their base, a portal shimmering at his command. Just as they were about to step through, a shout rang out. Wait! They turned in unison to see Leopold charging toward them, his face flushed with determination. He skidded to a halt, panting but standing tall. I just wanted to say. I'm forever grateful for what you did for my brother. But don't think for a second that means I'll go easy on you. He clenched his fists, eyes fierce. You may not see me as much now. I know I haven't had the best results, and I couldn't save my brother myself, but I swear I'll show you. I'll keep climbing in rank, and I'll become the Wizard King before you do. With dramatic flair, he pressed a thumb, lit with a small flame, to the mark on his forehead. The searing heat didn't make him flinch. This is my promise, he declared, his voice unwavering. The Black Bulls glanced at each other in confusion, tilting their heads slightly. Leopold mirrored their confusion, his brows furrowing. Did I say something wrong? Yet? Asta burst out, pointing an accusatory finger. Stephen doesn't even want to be the Wizard King. And if anyone here should be receiving that declaration, it's me. I'm the one who's going to become the Wizard King. Leopold's eyes darted between Asta and Stephen, momentarily dumbfounded. Wait, you don't want to be the Wizard King? Who wouldn't want to be the Wizard King? That's the most important job in the entire kingdom. His hand went to his head as he sighed, looking slightly defeated. Now I feel like my declaration was pointless. Hello. Asta waved his arms frantically. Don't pretend you can't see me just because I'm short. Stephen chuckled, the seriousness of the moment diffusing. Just because I don't want to be Wizard King doesn't mean I don't have my own dreams and ambitions. Your declaration wasn't pointless, let's just see who reaches their goal first. Leopold straightened up, a grin breaking through his seriousness. I won't forget that. He turned to Asta, the fire in his eyes reigniting. And you, Don't think I've forgotten you. That challenge was for you too. I will become the Wizard King. Over my dead body. Asta retorted, stomping toward the portal. The rest of the Black Bulls followed, waving their goodbyes. Leopold stood for a moment, hands on his hips and a grin plastered on his face, until he heard Stephen's and Asta's voices just before they disappeared. Who was that guy again? Asta asked, scratching his head. No clue, Stephen replied, the amusement evident in his tone. Leopold's smile faltered as he stared at the fading swirl of magic, eyes narrowing with a small pout. Now that's just mean.
Thanks for listening.